Tonight at the Viridian Tower, the rain pours down as if it wants to wipe out the city. Inside, the most dangerous men are gathered, guns hidden in suits, smiles concealing daggers. Roman Virelli walks in with a woman in his arms, something he never allowed himself to do. His ordinary secretary. No one notices. But when the crystal lights fall on her face, the room falls silent. And at the other end of the room, a man suddenly realizes it's too late to stop. Like and comment the city you're watching to let me know how far this story has progressed. Watch until the end, because tonight, no one will leave unscathed. The rain had been falling since noon, which in Celeste Arden's experience meant nothing good was coming. She stood at the bathroom mirror of her apartment on the 14th floor of a building that smelled like old heating ducts and other people's cooking, and she pressed both palms flat against the cold porcelain edge of the sink. Her reflection stared back at her, hair pinned tight at the base of her skull, frameless glasses slightly fogged from the shower she'd just taken, the kind of face that slid past people's attention without catching. That was the point. That had always been the point. On her bed, laid out with the precision of something she'd been dreading for 2 months, was the silver dress. She hadn't bought it. It had arrived in a garment bag at her office desk 11 days ago with a single card inside, no signature, only Roman's handwriting in black ink. Gala, Saturday. You're coming with me. Not a question. Roman Virelli had never once in 3 years asked her anything that sounded like a question. Celeste pulled the glasses off her face and set them on the edge of the sink. Without them, the mirror gave her back something she spent most days trying to bury. High cheekbones her mother had given her, eyes the color of wet slate that her father had always said were too sharp for her own good, a mouth set in a line that people read as cold when it was really just careful. She picked up the dress. The Viridian Tower rose 42 stories above the financial district, and tonight it was the most dangerous building in the city. Celeste knew this the way she knew most things, quietly, with her mouth shut. She'd spent 3 years at Roman's right hand cataloging the names, the faces, the coded ledger entries that no one ever thought she was really reading. She was furniture to most of them, a fixture. The woman who brought documents and disappeared. The car Roman sent was black and windowless from outside. His driver, a man named Dex, who had never once made eye contact with her in 3 years, held the door without a word. She got in. Roman was already there. He was wearing a charcoal suit the color of gunmetal, tie loosened at the collar in the particular way that meant he'd already been working since 5 in the morning and resented every hour after 6. He looked like what he was, a man who had clawed his way to the top of something built on violence and held it there through force of will and calculated ruthlessness. He was 41 and looked it in the best possible way, the kind of man whose face had earned its angles. There was a shallow scar along his jawline that most people knew better than to ask about. He looked at her when she got in, not the way men looked at women in silver dresses, the way Roman looked at things he was trying to solve. The glasses, he said, left them home. The hair, it's down. I can see that. He turned to look out the window. Something moved through his jaw. Not quite a clench, but close. You look different. That was the intention. Whose intention? She held his gaze. Yours. You sent the dress. Roman didn't answer that. He had a way of letting silence do work that most men needed sentences for. The car moved through the rain-slicked streets, and Celeste pressed her back against the leather seat and breathed through her nose and thought about the envelope she'd found 3 hours ago tucked under her apartment door. No return address. Printed, not handwritten, 4 photographs inside and a single line of text. Moretti kills him tonight. You can stop it or watch it happen. She had burned the photographs in her kitchen sink. She had stood there watching the edges curl and blacken and told herself it didn't matter to her. She had told herself that twice more in the car and believed it less each time. The ballroom hit her like a physical thing. 200 people in the kind of clothes that cost more than most people made in a year, moving under crystal chandeliers that scattered light across marble floors imported from somewhere that didn't exist on any map she'd ever seen. The orchestra occupied the far end of the room. Strings first, then the low pulse of brass that moved through the chest. Champagne on silver trays. The smell of wealth and threat layered together until they were indistinguishable. Roman's hand settled at the small of her back the moment they entered. The pressure of it, steady, deliberate, sent something hot up her spine that she catalogued and set aside. The room registered them. She felt it happen in waves, heads turning, conversations fraying at the edges. She recognized most of the faces. Councilman Dre, who had been taking payments from the syndicate's construction arm for 6 years. The Harmon brothers, who ran the Eastern Docks and had attended every one of these galas since before Roman took control of the organization. Leon Casso, the casino owner, who had 3 arrest records that had all somehow dissolved and whose eyes went immediately to Roman's hand at her back with the kind of attention that preceded violence. She didn't let any of it reach her face. "Breathe," Roman said, low and close to her ear. "I am breathing." "You're scanning." "I'm looking at the room." "Same thing." His hand pressed slightly. "Don't. Not yet." Which meant he already knew something was wrong tonight. She had wondered. Roman didn't bring women to public events. The rule was absolute. Everyone who'd worked with him long enough knew it. In 3 years, she had never seen him violate it. Which meant tonight was not a coincidence, and the dress was not a gift, and whatever Roman knew or suspected, she was here for a reason that neither of them had said out loud yet. She filed that away and smiled at the first man who approached them. Bump. His name was Theo Bassett, and he ran legitimate front companies for the syndicate's financial infrastructure, the kind of man who wore his corruption in his cufflinks. He shook Roman's hand for too long and looked at Celeste for a half-second more than he should have. "Roman, I didn't know you were bringing company." "Now you know," Roman said. Theo's smile turned professional. "Miss Arden," she said. "Celeste Arden." Something crossed his face, too fast for most people to catch. She caught it the way she caught everything, filed it, tagged it, kept moving. "Beautiful name," Theo said. "Thank you." Roman guided her away with the slight pressure of 2 fingers at her spine, moving them toward the bar along the north wall. She waited until they had distance. "He recognized the name," she said. "I know." "You expected that?" "I expected something like it." He took 2 glasses of champagne from a passing tray and handed one to her. "Your father built the financial backbone of this organization before I took it over. His name still means something to certain people." Her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. She kept her face completely still. "You knew who I was when you hired me," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd suspected it for a year. Hearing it confirmed felt like pressing on a bruise she'd been pretending wasn't there. "Yes," Roman said simply. "And you waited 3 years to tell me." "I waited for you to be ready." "For what?" He looked at her over the rim of his glass. "For tonight." The weight of what she didn't know pressed against the back of her teeth for the next 40 minutes, while she worked the room at Roman's side, listening to conversations she was meant to absorb, watching faces she was meant to read. This was what she was good at. This was what she'd spent years training herself to do in the years before she ever walked into Roman's office with a fabricated resume and her father's silence in her chest like a stone. She knew most of what the Nero Syndicate was. She knew its operations the way you knew a thing you'd grown up circling from a careful distance. Her father had built it. The offshore accounts, the layered shell companies, the financial architecture that made the organization functionally invisible to any prosecutor who came looking. Elias Arden had been brilliant at it, and then one day when Celeste was 19 years old, her father had simply stopped existing. No body, no trial, no explanation. A phone call that went dead mid-sentence and then nothing for 4 years. She had spent those 4 years building herself into someone capable of finding out what happened. She had spent the last 3 inside the belly of the organization that had swallowed him, and she still didn't have the answer. She found the first anomaly near the kitchen corridor at 8:47. 2 men she didn't recognize, which alone meant nothing. There were always faces at these events she hadn't cataloged. But these 2 were standing at a particular angle to the room's main entrance with their weight distributed in the way that meant readiness, not socializing. Catering staff didn't stand like that. Bodyguards for specific guests stood near their principals, not near service corridors. She clocked them without breaking stride and kept moving. The second anomaly was a face she did recognize. Vincent Moretti stood near the ballroom's west archway, talking to a city official whose name she'd never bothered to learn. Moretti was 63, silver-haired, the kind of physically diminished man whose power lived entirely in the infrastructure he controlled. Old money connections, 2 judges, 1 federal contact she'd only ever seen referenced by initial. He had been Roman's predecessor's most trusted ally. Since Roman's ascension 7 years ago, he had occupied a position of nominal loyalty that everyone in the organization understood was neither nominal nor loyal. He was not supposed to be here tonight. She had typed the guest list herself. His name was not on it. She turned smoothly and made her way back toward Roman, who was deep in conversation with 3 men whose body language she read as financial, the particular relaxation of men discussing numbers rather than threats. She touched his arm lightly, once, the signal they'd developed over 3 years of working adjacently in situations where direct communication was dangerous. He didn't look at her, but the conversation shifted, and within 4 minutes he'd extracted himself with the effortless social precision that was one of the things she'd studied about him before she ever decided to get close to him. "Moretti," she said when he reached her. Roman's expression didn't change. "Where?" "West Arch. And there are 2 men near the kitchen corridor who don't belong." "How many do you count total?" She understood the question. She let the room run through her mind the way she'd been cataloging it for the past hour. 6, maybe 7. 2 at the main doors, these 2 at the corridor, 1 near the orchestra riser who's been watching the emergency exit for 20 minutes, and at least 1 on the upper mezzanine. I caught a reflection in the chandelier. Roman was quiet for 3 seconds. 7, he said. I had 5. You found the mezzanine. You were already counting. I've been counting since we walked in. His eyes moved to the west arch without appearing to. Moretti wasn't invited. I know. I typed the list. Which means someone gave him access. Someone inside. He finished his champagne and set it down. This is why you're here, Celeste. She turned to look at him directly, which she rarely did in professional settings because looking at Roman directly had a way of making the professional components of the situation harder to maintain. You need me to find the inside contact, she said. I need you to do what you've been doing for 3 years without anyone knowing. Read the room. Find the thread. He looked at her then, really looked, in that way that had nothing to do with the silver dress. Because if I'm right about what Moretti is planning tonight, I can't trust anyone else in this building. What do you think he's planning? Roman's jaw moved. I think he's going to try to end this. She absorbed that. End this. A man like Moretti didn't move against Roman directly. He didn't have the physical infrastructure for it. He operated through arrangements, through positioned pieces, through the kind of assassination that looked like an accident or a rival's work. When, she said, before midnight, before the evening breaks and people scatter. He paused. The financial restructuring vote is Monday. If I'm dead before Monday, the board defaults to his preferred candidate, and the organization folds back into his control within a year. Celeste stood still inside the noise of the ballroom and felt the thing she'd been carrying since she opened that envelope 3 hours ago settle into something concrete. She had options. She had always had options, which was the only way she'd survived this long. She could find the thread Roman was asking her to find. She could do it because it was the thing she was built to do, and because Moretti was the name she'd been circling for 4 years, and because if Roman died tonight, whatever access she had to the truth about her father died with him. Or she could let it happen. Walk out. Disappear again. She looked at Roman's profile. The scar on his jaw, the tension he was carrying in his shoulders that most people would read as casual authority. And she thought about the envelope. Moretti kills him tonight. You can stop it or watch it happen. Someone had written that and put it under her door. Someone who knew she was here. Someone who understood that she was the variable in tonight's equation. Give me 40 minutes, she said. She started with Theo Bassett. Not because he was the most obvious thread, but because his face had done something when she said her name. And the things people's faces did in the first half second before control kicked in were almost always true. She found him near the bar, talking to a woman in red who left conveniently when Celeste approached. Too conveniently, she noted, the way a person left a space they'd been positioned to vacate. Mr. Bassett, she said, I wanted to apologize if I was abrupt earlier. His smile was rehearsed. Not at all. Roman keeps his personal life private. It's just a surprise to see him with someone. We've worked together for 3 years. It's hardly personal. Of course. He sipped his drink. Arden. I'm trying to place the name. It's a common enough name. In this room, it isn't. He looked at her over the glass rim. Your father, Elias Arden. He did some financial consulting for the organization years back, before Roman's time. She kept her face neutral and her breathing even. I wasn't aware of that. Most people aren't. He paused, and she watched the calculation moving behind his eyes. How much to say, what she might know, what it would cost him either way. He was talented. It was unfortunate what happened. What did happen? She asked. He caught himself. The smile tightened. I misspoke. I barely knew the man. I was junior then, just a name I've heard mentioned. He set his glass down. Excuse me? She let him go and stood for a moment looking at the space he'd vacated and thinking about the word he'd used. Unfortunate. Not disappeared. Not left. He'd started to say something specific and pulled back, which meant he knew something specific. She filed it and moved. The orchestra shifted to something slower, and the crowd redistributed. Celeste moved through it the way water moved through a system, finding the channels, following the pressure. She placed 2 more of the unknown men, one near the coat room, one stationed outside the main bathroom corridor in the guise of a guest who'd had too much to drink. The drunk routine was good, but the posture underneath it was wrong. She tracked their sight lines and mapped the positions together and felt the geometry of it come together in her chest with a cold clarity. They were coverage positions. 6 men, minimum, covering the 4 primary exits and 2 service routes, which meant whoever was the principal target wasn't going to be allowed to leave. Roman was the target. She'd known that from the envelope. But knowing it and standing in a room where the infrastructure of it was already in place were different experiences, and she let the difference land fully so it wouldn't surprise her later. She checked the time. 8:59. She'd been in the room for 80 minutes, and she had approximately 40 left before Roman's estimate of midnight pressure began to build. She needed the inside contact, the person who had given Moretti access, who had positioned these men, who had arranged the coverage. Without that name, she couldn't dismantle it. She could only warn Roman, and warning Roman meant moving him, and moving him meant forcing Moretti's hand earlier than planned with less control. She needed the name. She thought about the people who had the access. Guest list management had gone through her. Through her, but she had not been the only person with the file. It had been routed through Roman's executive communications chain before she finalized it, which meant 3 people had touched it before it reached her. Roman's deputy operations manager, his head of event security, and the personal assistant who handled scheduling for the event team. She knew 2 of those 3 people well enough. The third, the event team assistant, a man named Crane, who had joined the organization 14 months ago, she had less data on. She'd noticed him the way she noticed everything, had tagged his file mentally without yet having reason to pull the thread. She had reason now. She found him near the mezzanine stairs speaking quietly into a phone. She didn't approach. She positioned herself 8 feet away with a champagne flute and a piece of the crowd between them and watched. His body language was compressed, shoulders pulled inward, the particular tension of someone receiving instructions. His eyes moved to the west arch where Moretti stood twice in 30 seconds. There it was. She turned and walked back toward Roman, navigating the crowd with her pulse steady and her mind moving through the problem. She had the thread. She had Crane. She had Moretti's position and the rough placement of 6 armed men and a specific window of approximately 40 minutes before the room became a geometry of violence. Roman was where she'd left him, now in conversation with 2 men whose body language she read as legitimate, real estate probably, or port logistics, the kind of business that was legitimate and also not. He didn't look at her when she stepped to his side. She leaned slightly in, close enough to speak under the orchestra. Crane is your inside contact. Roman's jaw moved once. He's been communicating with someone. I believe Moretti directly. 6 positioned men, coverage on all primary exits and both service routes. They aren't planning an exit for him. He's not supposed to leave. Silence. The orchestra moved through a long phrase. How long have you known about Crane? Roman asked. I've had him flagged for 11 months. I didn't have evidence. Now you do. Enough to act on. She paused. You need to move. Not out. They've covered out. You need to get to a defensible interior position and let me work the room. Let you work the room, he repeated. I can reach Crane before he knows I'm a threat. I can get the trigger point, when they plan to move, what the signal is. If I know the signal, you can counter it. Roman was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the ballroom moved in its elegant choreography, oblivious or pretending to be. Celeste, he said. What? The photograph someone put under your door tonight. She went very still. How long have you known about that? She asked. Long enough. He finally looked at her. I sent it. The floor did not move. She was very certain of that. The marble was solid and the building was 42 stories of reinforced steel and concrete, and the floor did not move. But something shifted underneath her certainty. Something structural, the way a weight-bearing wall sounds different when you knock on the wrong place. You sent it, she said. I needed you to decide. Not because I ordered you to. Because you chose it. That's a manipulation. Yes, he said simply. And you came anyway. She stared at him. The man who had hired her knowing who she was. The man who had waited 3 years. The man who, she was now understanding, had known far more about her purpose in his organization than she had ever allowed herself to confirm. My father, she said. Her voice was level. She was proud of that. Roman's expression changed by a degree that most people would have missed. Not tonight. Roman, there are 6 armed men in this building, and Moretti is 40 feet away. Not tonight. His eyes held hers with the particular intensity he usually reserved for decisions that ended careers or lives. Get me through tonight, and I will tell you everything I know. I give you my word. His word. She had 3 years of evidence about what Roman Virelli's word meant to the people he chose to extend it to. She also had 3 years of evidence about what happened to the people he decided were done. She was still deciding which category she was in. Crane, she said finally, give me 15 minutes. She turned before he could answer and walked back into the crowd. She found Crane at the base of the mezzanine stairs, phone now pocketed, a glass of something amber in his hand that he was using as a prop. He was 32, sharp-jawed, the kind of physically unremarkable that was professionally useful. He had good eyes. She'd noted that in his file. Eyes that moved and cataloged, like hers. She walked up to him with the ease of someone who belonged exactly where they were and said, You should know that Roman has already identified you. Crane went still. She kept her voice conversational, pleasant, the way she'd kept her face neutral in front of Bassett. You've been careful. Better than most of his security staff would have caught. But you made the call from inside the perimeter, and I was watching. She paused. What I need from you right now is the signal. What's the trigger that tells your people to move? He looked at her, processing, recalibrating. You're his secretary. I'm a lot of things, she said. Right now I'm the person standing between you and what Roman does to people who betray him. Tell me the signal. You can't. I have your phone records, your positioning tonight, and in about 9 minutes I'm going to have Roman's security team pull you out of this room. She watched his face. Or you can tell me the trigger and walk out of this building tonight with your life. That's the offer. Crane's jaw worked. His eyes moved to the west arch, the reflex of a man checking whether rescue was available. Midnight, he said, low and tight. The chandelier on the east side goes dark for 30 seconds. Maintenance scheduled it as cover. That's when they move. How many inside the room? 3. The others are at exits. Where does Moretti go when it starts? Crane hesitated. Where? She said. Mezzanine. He has a sniper positioned up there. The 3 inside are crowd management. Panic and scatter. Run the principal toward the north exit. His jaw clenched. There is no north exit tonight. She absorbed this. The precision of it. Moretti had built a funnel. Use 3 men to drive Roman through the panic toward the only exit that wasn't covered by his people, and the only exit that led directly into the sightline of a mezzanine sniper. Not just an assassination, a performance. Roman was meant to be seen running. "Walk to the south service door," she said to Crane. "Go now. Don't look at anyone." He left. She didn't watch him go. She stood for a moment in the heart of the ballroom, the orchestra playing something that probably had a name she'd never bothered to learn, the crystal chandeliers above her scattering cold light across 200 people who had no idea that the room they were standing in had already been turned into a mechanism. She checked the time. 9:44. 2 hours and 16 minutes to midnight. She had a sniper on the mezzanine and 3 positioned men and Vincent Moretti, who had known her father's name, who had been present in this organization when her father disappeared, who was standing 40 feet away behind a silver-haired smile with enough infrastructure in place to end Roman Virelli's life, with 20 men who would never be traced back to him. She had 2 hours. She turned and walked toward the West Arch. She was going to talk to Moretti. She hadn't decided yet whether that was courage or a very elegant form of self-destruction. In her experience, those two things were often identical. Roman was going to be furious. The thought arrived without concern and was set aside equally without concern. Moretti saw her coming from 15 feet away. She watched him register her. The slight shift in his posture. The social smile that didn't change, but the eyes behind it did. He said something brief to the city official beside him, who evaporated with the same suspicious convenience as the woman in red near Bassett. She reached him and stopped at a distance that communicated negotiation rather than threat. "Miss Arden," Moretti said. Her stomach tightened. "You know my name," she said. "I knew your father." He said it with the comfortable ease of a man who had never needed to hide anything because he'd always had enough money to make hiding unnecessary. "You look very much like him, actually, the eyes especially." "Then you know why I'm here." "I imagine I do." He tilted his head. "You've been inside Roman's organization for 3 years. I've known about you for 2 of them. I assumed you were working toward something." "I was." "And now?" She held his gaze. "Now I'm telling you to stand down tonight." Something moved behind his eyes that might have been amusement, and might have been something older and colder than that. "That's a very bold thing to say to me in this room. I know what's positioned in this room. I know the signal and the timing and the mezzanine setup." She kept her voice even. "Pull your people out." Moretti was quiet for a moment. Around them, the ballroom continued its indifferent performance. "Your father," he said, "was a man I respected enormously, genuinely. What happened to him was—" "Don't," she said. The word came out harder than she'd intended. She adjusted. "Don't use him as a tool in this conversation." Moretti's expression shifted. Something in it that was not quite regret, but was adjacent to it. "Roman has something you want," he said. "Yes. He has it because he took it. Because everything Roman Virelli holds, he took it from someone. Your father built the financial network that made this organization powerful. Roman inherited that and then consolidated it and pushed out every person who built it before him, including your father." His voice was measured, the tone of a man reciting a history he'd lived. "I am not your enemy, Miss Arden. You have a sniper on the mezzanine." "I have leverage in the mezzanine," he said. "There's a difference." She studied him. The silver hair and the politician's posture and the eyes that had been doing this for 40 years longer than she had. He wasn't stupid. He wasn't wrong about Roman either. She knew enough to know that. Roman's ascension had been a consolidation and a purge, the way all power transfers were. But he was wrong about tonight. "Pull your people," she said again. "Whatever you know about my father, whatever you're holding, I want it. Not like this." Moretti looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached into his breast pocket and removed a small photograph. He held it out. She took it, looked at it. It was her father. Older than she remembered. The photograph was recent, or recent enough. He was sitting at a table in a room she didn't recognize, and he was alive. Her hands did not shake. She was very deliberate about that. "Where is he?" she said. "Roman knows," Moretti said. He has known for 2 years. The ballroom went on around her. The music and the crystal light and the elegant architecture of 200 people who were props in a play that had been running since before she was born. She stood in the center of it holding a photograph of her father's living face and felt something she had very carefully not allowed herself to feel for 4 years begin to crack through the foundation of everything she'd built to contain it. Roman knew. Roman had known for 2 years. She had been in his office every day for 3 years. She had been inside his organization, at his side, in his complete and absolute proximity. And he had known where her father was and said nothing. The photograph was very steady in her hands. She looked up at Moretti. "I'll get your answer after midnight," she said. "Don't move tonight." She turned and walked back into the room. Her face was still. Her hands were still. Her breathing was controlled and even and deliberate. Inside her chest, behind the careful architecture of 3 years of survival, something was burning. She walked toward Roman, and the weight of what she was carrying, the photograph, the knowledge, the answer she'd been hunting for 4 years sitting in a man's hands while he told her not tonight, like she was a problem to be managed, pressed against the back of her eyes with a heat she hadn't let herself feel in a very long time. She stopped 3 feet from him. He turned, read her face. Something changed in his expression, something that she identified, with cold precision, as the expression of a man who knows he has run out of time on a particular secret. "You know where he is," she said. Roman said nothing. "You have known for 2 years." The orchestra played its indifferent music, and the chandeliers scattered their indifferent light, and Roman Virelli, the most dangerous man in the room, looked at her with something she didn't have a word for yet. Regret, maybe, or something more complicated than regret, and opened his mouth. And the lights went out. The darkness was not gradual. It dropped like something physical, a weight descending over the room all at once, chandeliers extinguishing in a single breath, emergency floor lighting failing half a second later. For 2 full seconds, the ballroom held 200 people in absolute black, the orchestra stopping mid-phrase with the particular stutter of musicians who have lost their sheet music to sudden dark and don't yet know if they should be afraid. Then the first shot came, not from inside the room. From above, the mezzanine, a single controlled crack that punched through the acoustic tile and sent the room from confused to animal in the space between heartbeats. The screaming started immediately, which was the point, and the scramble of 200 bodies in formal wear against marble floors in complete darkness produced a sound that Celeste had no previous reference for and filed away instantly as something she never wanted to hear again. Roman's hand found her wrist in the dark. Not gentle. The grip of a man who has survived rooms like this before and knows that gentle gets people killed. He pulled. She moved with him, already orienting by sound. The screaming clustered toward the center of the room where the instinct to group was pulling people. The service corridor to her left where she'd clocked the 2 unknown men. The mezzanine above where the shot had come from. She counted footsteps in the dark. Her own. Roman's. And underneath them, wrong, wrong, wrong. The specific rhythm of men moving with purpose through a panicked crowd. They hit the east wall at speed. Roman's back went against marble and she was beside him, shoulder pressed to his arm, both of them breathing in the darkness while the room dissolved into chaos around them. 3 inside, she said into his ear. "They're moving." "I heard." "North exit is the kill corridor. They're going to push the crowd." "I know." His grip on her wrist changed, loosened to her hand, which was worse somehow, more deliberate. "Stay with me." "There's a sniper on the mezzanine." "How many shots has he taken?" "1. "Warning shot," Roman said. She processed that. A warning shot in a darkened room full of panicking civilians wasn't tactical. It was theatrical. It was meant to accelerate the scatter, drive the crowd faster, create maximum noise and movement to mask the 3 men working the floor. "He's not shooting at you yet," she said. "Not yet." Roman's thumb moved once across the back of her hand. Not comfort, she thought, just information. "I'm here. I know where you are. The east service door, 30 feet. When I move, you move. There's a man stationed near the coat room, which is adjacent to, I know where my own building's coat room is, Celeste. The man near it is armed and has been in position for 2 hours. A pause. Shorter than most people's pauses. How do you want to handle it? The question landed in a way she hadn't expected. Not I'll handle it, not stay behind me, but the specific distribution of the problem into her hands as though it were the most natural thing in the world. 3 years of being furniture, and he asked like he'd always known she had an answer. I go first, she said. Tut. The emergency lighting flickered on at 40%. Dim red strips along the floor's perimeter. Enough to navigate, not enough to shoot accurately across the room. The effect was that the ballroom became a space of silhouettes and panic, which was worse than complete darkness in its own way. You could see people but not read them. Movement everywhere. The screaming had consolidated into crying and shouting, and the particular sound of tables being overturned as people built cover from furniture that was never designed for it. Celeste moved. She stayed low and fast along the east wall, using the crowd's momentum against itself, letting the surge of bodies toward the center create a backdraft of space along the perimeter. The silver dress was wrong for this, and she knew it, the shimmer catching what little light there was. But there was nothing to be done about it now, and she set the problem aside. The coat room attendant had abandoned his post, which left the alcove empty except for the man she'd identified. He was pressed against the wall beside the coat room door, with his weight forward, gun low, watching the room's chaos with the eyes of someone waiting for a specific cue. He hadn't seen her yet. She had 3 seconds before he did. She took them. She came from his left, his non-dominant side, she'd assessed that from his positioning earlier, and drove her elbow into his throat with her full body weight behind it. Not clean. She'd learned the mechanics of it from a man who'd taught self-defense classes in a rented gym above a parking structure, 3 years before she walked into Roman's building, and she'd practiced it enough times that muscle memory took over before thought did. He went down hard, the gun skittering across the alcove floor, and she was on it before he'd finished falling. She stood with the weapon in her hands and felt her own pulse in her palms. The weight of it was specific and real, and she breathed through the next 4 seconds with deliberate care. Roman appeared at her shoulder. He looked at the man on the floor, then at her. His face in the red emergency lighting was unreadable in the particular way Roman's face was always unreadable, which was to say it communicated nothing she could use, but she'd learned to read the edges of it. The edge right now was something she tentatively identified as recalibration. You've done that before, he said. Once, she said. Keep moving. The service corridor was narrow and smelled like industrial cleaning products and old metal, lit by a single fluorescent strip that buzzed with the particular anxiety of emergency power. Roman moved ahead of her, which she allowed because he knew the building's infrastructure and she didn't, and she kept her back to the wall as they moved, watching the door behind them. You need to tell me about my father, she said. Now. Yes, now. His stride didn't break. There's a minimum of 5 armed men in that building we just left. I'm aware of the situation in the building we just left. She kept her voice level. The gun was in her right hand and her heels were on the concrete, and she was walking through a service corridor in a silver dress that cost more than her month's rent, and none of it was the most important thing happening. You've had information about my father for 2 years. I want to know what you have. Roman stopped. He turned, and in the fluorescent buzz of the corridor, he looked at her with an expression that was not quite cornered, but was in the same county as it. A man who has managed information for 20 years and is now facing the specific moment when information stops being manageable. Elias is alive, he said. She already knew this. Moretti's photograph. But hearing it in Roman's voice was different. It arrived differently. It landed in the chest differently. Where? She said. A facility outside the city, 3 hours north. He paused. He's been there for 4 years. Your facility? My organization's facility, yes. She held his gaze. The fluorescent light buzzed. You kept him there. I didn't put him there. Roman's voice was flat and precise, the voice he used when he was being more careful than usual about the accuracy of what he said. He was there when I took control of the organization. He was an asset that my predecessor had contained. Contained. The word tasted like something she wanted to spit out. That's the accurate word. He's my father. I know who he is. Roman took 1 step toward her, deliberate, not aggressive, the particular motion of a man trying to close distance without triggering a response. I've known for 2 years because I've been working through how to get him out without destabilizing the board. There are 3 members who would view releasing him as a threat to their 2 years, she said. I was in your office every day for 2 years after you knew. I was in your building. I was in your life. The anger was cold, not hot. She noticed that about herself with detached clarity. It wasn't fire. It was something structural, something in the load-bearing walls. Every day you looked at me and said nothing. Celeste. Every day. The word landed between them and stayed there. Roman breathed. She watched him do it, the chest moving, the jaw set, the calculation behind his eyes that was always running, always processing. He was the kind of man who had survived this long by being faster and colder and more precise than every room he'd ever been in. She had studied him for 3 years, and she knew this about him the way she knew her own reflection, and she watched him make a decision. He asked me not to tell you, Roman said. The corridor was very still. What? She said. He knew you were inside the organization. He'd known for about 18 months when I made contact with him. Roman stopped, started again. He said if you knew he was alive, you'd try to get him out. He said you'd burn everything down to do it and you'd get yourself killed. A beat. He said you were exactly like him, and that made you exactly as reckless when it came to the people you loved. Her throat was doing something she didn't like. She swallowed it down. He knew I was here, she said. Yes. You talked to him. Twice, in person. She thought about that. Her father, alive, 3 hours north, behind walls that belonged to the organization he'd built, knowing she was inside it, watching from a distance the way she'd learned to watch from him. The particular inheritance of people who loved carefully and from cover. He's been protecting me, she said. He's been trying to. From inside a cell. From inside a situation, Roman said, which is what people do when they don't have better options. She looked at him. Is that what you're doing? With me? Protecting me from inside a situation? Roman's jaw moved. He didn't answer, which was an answer. She turned and kept walking down the corridor. The corridor opened into a maintenance level 2 floors below the ballroom, a space of exposed ductwork and electrical conduits that hummed with the building's nervous system. Roman led them to a secondary stairwell and held the door while she went through, and she heard, before she saw, that they were not alone. 2 men at the base of the stairs. Not his men. The posture was wrong, the positioning was wrong, and the half-second of hesitation before the first one raised his weapon was the hesitation of a man who'd expected to be waiting for a panicked target in a formal suit, not 2 people who'd come through a service corridor already moving fast. She shot first. Not at center mass. She wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Not tonight. But low, at the floor beside the first man's feet, and the crack of it in the stairwell's concrete acoustic was enormous. Both men flinched left by instinct. Roman was already moving right. What happened in the next 12 seconds was not clean. It was the opposite of clean. It was the sound of bodies against concrete walls, and Roman's elbow catching someone's nose, and her own shoulder slamming into a metal railing hard enough to leave a mark that would still be there a week later. The gun she was holding ended up pointed at the second man's face from a distance of approximately 2 feet. He was young, late 20s. There was blood from his lower lip where Roman had connected, and his eyes were very wide and very still. Where is Moretti? She said. Where is he positioned right now? The young man's eyes moved to Roman, seeking an authority he understood better. Roman was breathing hard against the opposite wall with the other man's wrist locked in a hold that communicated very clearly the range of outcomes available. Kid, Roman said, the woman with the gun is asking you something. The young man looked back at Celeste. His chest was doing something ragged, and she recognized it. The breath of someone discovering that an abstract risk has become a concrete room with concrete walls and no exits. Mezzanine, he said. He was going up when the lights cut. He has a radio. Who else is up there? One shooter, positioned at the north-facing rail. Who's running the interior 3? I don't know all of... Roman's hand moved slightly on the wrist, and the young man made a sound. Decker, and two others I don't know. I was only brought in for the stairwell. How many total? She said. 9. There were 9 of us inside the building. She and Roman looked at each other across the stairwell. 9. She'd counted 7. The building had more layers than she'd mapped. Bind them, she said to Roman. With what? She reached up without thinking and pulled the thin silk belt from the dress's waist, handed it over. Roman looked at it for half a second with an expression she would have called something close to disbelief under different circumstances. He used it. 2 floors up and moving through the back of the building, Roman's hand on her shoulder steering her through a turn she'd have missed in the dim light, she said, "You have people outside. 2 I trust completely. The rest I'm not sure of tonight. Get them inside. You need the mezzanine cleared before Moretti understands his stairwell coverage is gone. He'll have a radio check. He'll know in about 8 minutes. Then we have 8 minutes." Roman pulled a phone from inside his jacket. Not his primary phone, a secondary unit, the kind of thing you carried when you expected your primary to be monitored, and made a call that lasted 45 seconds. She didn't listen to the words. She was listening to the building, the muffled sounds of the ballroom above them, the distant cry of sirens that meant someone had called the police, which would add a variable she hadn't accounted for. He ended the call. 6 minutes. Then we move now. Celeste, he caught her arm. Not hard, but stopping. What you did in the stairwell. I've been practicing for 3 years. For tonight specifically? She met his eyes. I didn't know there'd be a tonight specifically. I practiced because I grew up watching my father get made invisible by people with more power than him, and I decided I'd rather be dangerous than invisible. She paused. Your organization taught me that, actually. 3 years of watching how it works. Something moved through his face. You've been preparing to take the organization down. I've been preparing to find my father. A beat. Whether or not those are the same thing depends on what happens in the next 20 minutes. Roman let go of her arm. They moved. The mezzanine staircase on the building's east side was not on the primary schematic. It was a maintenance access route that ran from the 3rd floor loading bay up through a utility shaft, emerging behind the decorative fascia of the mezzanine balcony. Roman knew it existed because it was his building, and because Roman Virelli had made a practice over 20 years of knowing the exits of every room he entered before he sat down in it. The shaft was barely wide enough for a person. The ladder rungs were cold steel and the darkness was absolute, and she climbed by feel, with the gun in her waistband and her hands on metal, and her breath measured and controlled. Above her, Roman climbed without sound. Below the muffled scale of ballroom chaos, she heard her own heartbeat. She thought about her father sitting in a room 3 hours north, knowing she was inside the organization that held him, choosing silence to protect her. The particular anguish of that, the love in it, the awful, practical love of a man who understood that the best thing he could do for his daughter was disappear for her, pressed against the back of her eyes, and she breathed through it and kept climbing. She thought about Roman, 2 years of knowing, 2 years of her father's face somewhere in his files and his conscience and whatever Roman Virelli used instead of a conscience, and him sitting across from her at briefings and reviews and late nights going over coded ledgers and saying nothing. She turned that fact over in her mind the way you turn something sharp to understand all its edges. He'd said her father asked him not to tell her. She believed that was true. She also believed Roman had his own reasons for the silence, and that those reasons had nothing to do with her father's wishes and everything to do with the particular calculation Roman made about every asset he possessed, which was what she was to him. She'd always known that. Knowing it and feeling it were, again, different experiences. The shaft ended at a hatch. Roman stopped above her, pressed his ear to it, waited. She waited. The sounds above. 2 voices. Low, one of them doing most of the talking. A radio crackle. Then a silence that stretched long enough to mean the radio check had been attempted and not completed. Roman looked down at her through the darkness. She couldn't see his face, but she could see the outline of his head. He held up 2 fingers. 2 people. Moretti and the shooter. She nodded. He pushed the hatch. The mezzanine was a narrow gallery above the ballroom floor, bordered by a decorative iron rail through which the chaos below was visible in stuttering emergency red. The shooter was at the north-facing position she'd been told about, a compact rifle on a bipod, the man behind it watching the ballroom floor through a scope. Moretti stood 8 feet back from the rail, with a radio in one hand and a phone in the other. He turned at the sound of the hatch. The shooter started to move. Roman was faster. She was watching Moretti, so she caught it in peripheral. The specific economy of Roman handling a professional problem with professional efficiency, the kind of violence that was almost architectural in its precision. The shooter went down. The rifle skittered. Roman straightened and looked at Moretti. Moretti looked back. The radio in his hand crackled. He didn't answer it. "Vincent," Roman said. "Roman." Moretti's voice was unchanged, the comfortable authority of a man who had been in difficult rooms for 4 decades and had learned that the voice was the last thing to give up. "You look worse for the evening. You tried to kill me. I tried to correct a problem." Moretti's eyes moved to Celeste. "I see you've corrected one of mine." She stepped forward to stand beside Roman. Below them, the ballroom was beginning to stabilize. Lights partially restored now, the police sirens closer, people moving toward exits in the organized panic that meant the immediate violence had stopped, but the understanding of what had happened hadn't caught up yet. "Elias Arden," she said to Moretti. He looked at her with the particular attention of a man choosing his next words. "A good man," he said. "One of the few I've known. Where is he?" "Roman knows where he is." He glanced at Roman. "I suspect he's told you, or was about to before I interrupted." "You arranged his imprisonment," she said. 4 years ago. You and Roman's predecessor?" Moretti's expression shifted. "That is a significant oversimplification." "Then uncomplicate it." He was quiet for a moment. Below them, the sirens had reached the building. She could hear the particular acoustic change of emergency vehicles in an enclosed space. "Your father discovered something," Moretti said. 4 years ago, while he was managing the financial architecture. He found evidence that Roman's predecessor was preparing to sell the entire syndicate's infrastructure to a federal informant. An organized dissolution. Walk away with immunity and leave everyone else to face prosecution. He paused. "Elias came to me. He'd found the records. He wanted to stop it. And you imprisoned him for that." "We protected him," Moretti said. "Roman's predecessor wanted him dead. What I arranged was—" He stopped. Amended. "Imperfect. But it kept him alive." She stared at him. The thing she wanted to say pressed against the back of her teeth with the specific force of 4 years of not knowing. "You kept him in a cell for 4 years," she said, "and called it protection." "Yes," Moretti said simply. "I did." Roman's hand moved, not toward her, not a touch, just a shift in his weight that she felt in the air between them, like a man standing next to a fire and understanding something about its temperature. "The federal contact," Roman said. "The informant deal your predecessor was arranging. You've been sitting on that information for 4 years. Moretti looked at him. "That's why you want control of the organization," Roman said. "Not power, cover. The informant records are still live, and whoever holds them holds the threat." Something passed through Moretti's face, the very specific expression of a man who has been read correctly by someone he underestimated. "The records are collateral," Moretti said. "Nothing more." "They're leverage," Roman said, "against federal prosecution, against me, against anyone who might try to move on you." His voice was level and cold, and she heard the man underneath the man she'd been working for, the part of Roman Virelli that had taken an organization built on fear and made it more afraid of him than of anything else. "And Elias Arden is the only other person alive who knows those records exist." Moretti said nothing. "Which means he wasn't protected," Roman said. "He was silenced. He was kept alive. At your convenience." The word fell into the mezzanine silence and stayed there. Celeste looked at Moretti. 63 years old, silver-haired, the careful eyes of a man who had built 4 decades of power through the patient arrangement of other people's vulnerabilities. He had kept her father alive because her father was useful. He had kept him imprisoned because her father was dangerous. He had come tonight not because of a power struggle with Roman, but because Roman had been getting close to the financial records. The reorganization vote, the audit trail, The things Roman was doing on Monday if he survived the weekend. She understood all of it now. It sat in her chest like a stone that had finally reached the bottom. "The records," she said. "Where are they?" Moretti looked at her with an expression that she identified as something between respect and resignation. "Your father has them," he said. "He always had them." That was the arrangement. Roman turned to look at her. She felt it, the weight of his attention, the recalibration happening in real time. The specific moment when Roman Virelli understood that the woman he'd hired 3 years ago and the asset he'd been managing and the person standing beside him on a mezzanine above a ruined ballroom were all the same person, and that person had just become the most important variable in everything he'd spent the last 7 years building. Below them, the ballroom doors opened and police flooded in. Moretti reached into his jacket. "Don't," Celeste said. He stopped. His hand, she saw, was not reaching for a weapon. It was reaching for a phone. He held it up, screen facing her, a live video feed. Small, grainy, the timestamp running in the corner. A room with institutional walls, a man sitting at a table. Her father. Older. Thinner. But the eyes her father had passed to her. The ones Moretti had said were too sharp for her own good. The ones she'd spent 4 years looking for in every room she'd entered. Those were the same. "I've been in contact with him for 3 days, Moretti said. "He knows I'm here tonight. He knows what I was attempting." He paused. "He asked me to give you something." He held out the phone. On the screen, her father looked directly at the camera. He said one sentence, 4 words. The audio was barely audible above the noise of the police entering below them, but she heard it. She had been hearing it in the back of her mind for 4 years. "I know you're safe." Her throat closed. Roman's hand found her arm. Not a grip this time, just contact, the presence of a hand on her arm in the specific way that communicated something she didn't have a word for and wasn't sure she deserved from him right now. Moretti said, "He also said to tell you that the records are yours when you want them, not mine, not Roman's." He looked at Roman. "Which means tonight ends here, for both of us." Roman stared at him. "If I walk away from this building," Moretti said, "the records stay with Elias. And you walk away from tonight with your life and your organization intact. That was the arrangement I made with him 3 days ago." He paused. "He is, as I said, a very good man. Better than either of us." The sirens were inside the building now, voices echoing up from below. The particular organized chaos of law enforcement entering a scene they didn't understand yet and trying to build a picture from what the room told them. Roman looked at Moretti for a long time. Then he looked at Celeste. She understood the question he wasn't asking, the calculation he was running, the specific moment when the most controlled man she'd ever known was standing at the edge of a decision that couldn't be unmade. She thought about her father's voice. 4 words. 3 years of silence that had been, she now understood, its own form of communication. The silence of a man who loved her enough to disappear so she'd keep moving forward instead of burning everything down to reach him. She thought about Roman. 2 years of knowing. The specific texture of that silence and what it had cost him to maintain it, and whether the cost meant anything, and whether she cared if it did. She thought about the records. Her father's records, the thing that had started all of this. "Let him go," she said to Roman. Roman's expression didn't change. "He walks out of this building," she said. "Then we get my father." Below them, a uniformed officer was looking up at the mezzanine. She saw the moment his eyes found them. Roman, her, the downed shooter, Moretti. And the radio going immediately to his mouth. Roman looked at Moretti. "You have 30 seconds before they reach those stairs." Moretti straightened his jacket with the unhurried dignity of a man who had been escorted out of difficult situations for 40 years and had the muscle memory for it. He looked at Celeste. "I am sorry," he said, "for your father. Whatever you believe about the rest of it, that part is true." She didn't answer. He moved toward the service stairs at the mezzanine's far end, not running, walking, the specific controlled exit of a man who understood that urgency communicated guilt and stillness communicated authority. In 15 seconds, he was gone. Roman watched the empty space where Moretti had been. Then he looked at her. "The records," he said. "If your father has them, they're not yours," she said. "Celeste, they're not yours." She met his eyes. The police were on the main stairs now. She could hear them. "We get my father out. Whatever happens to the organization after that depends on what those records say." She paused. "And on what you tell me tonight. All of it. Everything you've kept." Roman's jaw worked. Below them, the first officer cleared the mezzanine stairwell door. "Roman Virelli," the officer said. "Don't move." Roman looked at the officer, then back at Celeste. Then, quietly, the most controlled man she'd ever known said the words she hadn't expected from him. "I'll tell you everything." The officers moved in. She stood in the red emergency light with her father's voice still in her ears, and the weight of everything she now knew pressing against every careful structure she'd spent years building, and she felt, underneath the cold and the anger and the 4 years of hunting, the specific crack of something beginning to give way. The ballroom below was full of police and wreckage and the aftermath of a night that had already changed too many things to count. And somewhere 3 hours north, in a room with institutional walls, her father was sitting at a table and waiting. The officer reached for Roman's arm. Roman didn't resist. He looked at Celeste one final time with an expression she had no category for yet, too specific to be read as guilt alone, too raw to be strategy. And the officer's hand closed around Roman's arm and Roman let it happen, which was the most unsettling thing Celeste had seen all night. She had watched Roman Virelli operate for 3 years. She had watched him close deals across tables where the other man didn't understand he'd already lost. She had watched him end conversations with a look that communicated consequences more efficiently than language. She had never once watched him surrender to anything. He surrendered to the officer's grip with the specific stillness of a man who had decided, in real time, that this was the correct move, which meant he had already calculated the next 4 steps. She filed that and kept her face neutral as 2 more officers cleared the mezzanine, weapons up, voices clipped and professional in the way of people managing a scene they didn't have full information on yet. The downed shooter was assessed, cuffed, handed off. Someone called for medical. The radio traffic was dense and overlapping, and she stood in the middle of it in a silver dress with a gun she'd taken from a man in a coat room alcove, and understood that the next 60 seconds required her to be very specific about what she said and what she didn't. "Ma'am." The officer addressing her was young, mid-20s, the focused expression of someone running on adrenaline and protocol. "I need you to set that down." She crouched slowly and placed the gun on the floor and straightened with her hands visible. "Are you injured?" "No." "Your name?" "Celeste Arden. I'm Mr. Virelli's executive assistant." The officer's eyes moved to Roman, then back. "Were you present when the shooting started?" "We were in the ballroom, yes." "Did you discharge that weapon?" She held his gaze. "I found it on the floor during the evacuation." The lie was smooth, and she felt Roman register it from 8 feet away, the slight change in his breathing, the specific quality of attention that meant he was recalibrating again. "I'll need you to stay available for questioning," the officer said. "Of course." They processed Roman in the building's lobby, which had been converted into a staging area with the particular organized efficiency of a department that had planned for events like this one without knowing exactly which event it would be. She watched from 12 feet away as a detective, older, jacket over a dress shirt, the specific tired authority of a man who had been called in from somewhere else tonight, spoke to Roman in low, controlled tones. Roman answered everything. She could see it from the body language, the absence of resistance, the cooperative posture. He was building something with this conversation, she knew. Every answer Roman gave was a brick in a structure she couldn't see the plans for yet. Her phone had survived the evening in the small bag she'd carried into the gala, miraculously. She checked it now. 2 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize, both in the last 40 minutes. No voicemail. She called back. 3 rings. Then, "Miss Arden?" The voice was male, older, carrying the specific texture of someone who spent most of their time in institutional spaces, the acoustic flatness of rooms with no soft surfaces. Her chest tightened. "Who is this?" she said. "My name is Harlan Webb. I work for the facility where your father is being held." A pause. "I've been trying to reach you for the past hour. There's been a development." She turned away from the lobby's activity and pressed her back to the wall and kept her voice completely level. "What development?" "Your father was moved approximately 2 hours ago, before the situation at the gala began." Another pause, longer. "I don't know where they've taken him. I came on shift and he was gone. The transfer order has signatures I don't recognize and a clearance code that doesn't match any current protocol." She closed her eyes for 1 second, opened them. "Who authorized the transfer?" "That's what I can't find," Harlan Webb said. "The paperwork is clean on the surface. But I've been at this facility for 11 years, and I've never seen a transfer processed that fast. 3 hours, start to finish, and no one on staff was briefed." "When exactly?" "Transfer timestamp is 7:42 p.m. 7:42. 22 minutes after the gala started. Before the lights went out. Before Moretti's operation moved. Not Moretti then." She stood with the phone against her ear and the lobby noise around her and felt the specific shape of a problem she hadn't seen coming, rearrange everything she thought she'd understood about tonight. "Thank you," she said to Harlan Webb. "Don't speak to anyone else about this." She ended the call. She waited until the detective finished with Roman and a junior officer had taken down his contact information and he'd been told, with the particular language of law enforcement that meant we're not done with you, but we need to process more scene first, that he was free to remain available. Then she crossed the lobby and stopped beside him and said quietly, one sentence. "Someone moved my father before the gala started." Roman went very still. Not the stillness of a man hearing unexpected information, the stillness of a man hearing information he'd been afraid of. She saw it happen. The specific texture of Roman Virelli's stillness when something landed wrong, not surprise, not calculation, but something underneath both of those, something that lived closer to the surface than he usually allowed. "Tell me exactly what you were told," he said. She did. Concise, sequential, transfer timestamp, unrecognized signatures, clearance code anomaly, the facility contact who'd found the paperwork clean on the surface and wrong underneath. Roman was quiet for 4 seconds. "The clearance code system," he said carefully. "It was redesigned 8 months ago. New protocols, new authorization chain. Only 4 people in the organization have the current codes." She waited. "I'm one of them," he said. She watched his face. "I didn't authorize a transfer," he said. "That leaves 3 people." "2," he said. "One of those 4 is dead. Cardiac event, 6 weeks ago." He said it the way he said things he was still deciding how much to trust. "Which leaves Dex, my head of logistics, and Theo Bassett." Theo Bassett. The man whose face had moved when she said her name. The man who had used the word unfortunate and pulled back from whatever he'd been about to say. "Bassett," she said. "He has the code. He shouldn't—" "I never fully trusted him with operational infrastructure, but the code was distributed before I audited the authorization chain and—" Roman stopped, his jaw tightened. "He was in the building tonight. He was near the bar at 8:45. She remembered it precisely. The conversation, the calculation behind his eyes, the departure that had felt managed. "He left shortly after I talked to him. Before the lights went out." "Yes." Roman looked at her. The lobby processed its chaos around them. Officers, shaken gala guests, media beginning to gather at the perimeter outside. None of it registered as relevant. "Bassett has been running the syndicate's financial compliance division for 6 years, Roman said. "He has access to the facility's administrative records because the facility runs through the financial infrastructure. He stopped again. When Roman stopped mid-sentence, it was always because he'd reached something he didn't like. "I never considered him a threat. Because he seemed like furniture," she said. The word landed. Roman's eyes moved to her. "Yes," he said. She understood the parallel and let it sit there between them and didn't say anything more about it. "Where would Bassett take him?" she said. "If he was moving him ahead of tonight's operation, there are 2 facilities he has access to. One is port adjacent, the eastern dock infrastructure the Harmon brothers run. The other is, he paused. The other is a private property under a holding company he controls personally, a property that isn't in any organizational record I have visibility into. How do you know it exists? Because 18 months ago, I had a financial analyst do a quiet audit of Bassett's personal holdings. What I found suggested he'd been building a separate financial infrastructure for years, parallel to the organization's. Not skimming, building, positioning. He looked at something past her shoulder. I put it in a file and didn't move on it because I didn't have enough to justify the disruption. You let it sit. I miscalculated, he said. The words were flat and precise and cost him something to say. She could see that. You miscalculate a lot, she said. Yes. No deflection, no justification, just the word. She breathed through the urge to say something that would make her feel better for 30 seconds and make the next 4 hours harder. The private property, she said. Where? I need a terminal. The holding company's registration will have an address buried somewhere in the filing chain. He looked around the lobby. Not here. Your office. My office has been compromised tonight. Bassett has access. Then where? He looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man choosing to trust something he hasn't fully tested yet. I know a place, he said. The place was a fourth-floor walk-up on a street that the city's financial district had been slowly consuming for a decade. The kind of building that was 6 months from a demolition notice but currently still breathing. The stairwell smelling like decades of accumulated living. The hallway lighting running on a timer that gave you 30 seconds before it cut out. Roman knocked on a door at the end of the hall with 3 knocks, a pause, 2 more. The door opened. The man inside was 60, heavy-set, wearing a cardigan over a dress shirt at 11 at night, with the comfortable authority of someone who had never cared what his appearance communicated to other people. He had the eyes of someone who spent their professional life looking at numbers until numbers told him things. Roman, he said. He looked at Celeste, then at Roman's jacket, which had acquired several things over the course of the evening. You look terrible. I need your terminal, Carl. I'm aware of what you need. I've been watching the news for 40 minutes. Carl stepped back and let them in. The apartment was a controlled chaos of paper and screens. 2 large monitors running financial data, stacks of bound documents organized in a system that probably made sense to Carl and no one else. The particular smell of a space where someone worked and slept and ate in close proximity. A cat observed them from the top of a filing cabinet with profound indifference. Carl sat at his terminal without being asked and looked at Roman. Holding company name. Vantage Meridian Holdings, LLC, Carl typed. The screens populated. He moved through the data with the fast precision of a man who had spent 40 years navigating the deliberate complexity of corporate registration, the specific skill of finding the real thing underneath the layers of the presented thing. Celeste stood behind him and watched the screens and felt the particular alertness of information coming into focus after 4 years of blur. Registered in 2 states, Carl said. Delaware and here. Delaware registration is clean. Standard shell architecture, nothing unusual. Local registration has a managing member listed as a Paul Vante. He paused. Paul Vante is an anagram of vantage, which is lazy, but it works if nobody looks. Address, Roman said. 3 addresses. 1 is a registered agent's office downtown, purely administrative. 2nd is commercial property in the Port District. 3rd, Carl leaned forward. 3rd is a residential property under the managing member's name, not the LLC. Private purchase, 18 months ago. It's in the filing chain because the purchase was financed through the LLC's capital account, and whoever did the paperwork made one small error linking it. He pointed at the screen. Roman looked at the address. Something moved through his face. I know that location, he said. I thought you might, Carl said. Celeste looked at the address. 40 minutes north of the city, a county road number and a property designation. That's where he is, she said. It wasn't a question. Roman looked at her. We don't know. That's where he is. She felt it with the specific certainty of someone who had been hunting a thing long enough that when it stopped moving, they knew. Bassett moved him there tonight, ahead of whatever Moretti was doing, to use him as leverage or to hide him or both. The records my father has are what Bassett actually wants. Moretti's operation tonight was a distraction, or a parallel move that Bassett was exploiting. Roman was quiet. "They're not working together," she said. "Moretti and Bassett. Moretti wants the organization. Bassett wants the records. They both needed you dead tonight, but for different reasons." "And now that tonight failed," Roman said slowly, "Bassett still has my father. He still has access to the records if he can get to them through my father." She stopped. "We need to move. Now, before Bassett understands that Moretti's operation failed and adjusts." Roman looked at Carl. Carl was already looking back at Roman with the expression of a man who had been in adjacent proximity to dangerous situations for years and had very specific feelings about continuing in that proximity. "I need a car," Roman said. "I need to not be in this conversation," Carl said, but he reached into a drawer and put a set of keys on the desk. To mount. The car was a 10-year-old domestic sedan that smelled like fast food and had a crack in the passenger side mirror that split the reflection into two slightly offset images. Celeste sat in the passenger seat in a silver dress that had been through more than silver dresses were designed for, and watched the city slide away behind them as Roman drove north on roads that thinned from 4 lanes to 2 as the urban density dropped away. It was 11:43 p.m. She did the math. Bassett had moved her father at 7:42. That was 4 hours ago. 4 hours was enough time to reach the property address, establish position, understand that the gala operation had failed, and start making decisions about what happened next. "He'll have watched the news," she said. "Yes." "He knows Moretti's people failed. He knows, which means he knows I'm alive and Moretti's leverage is gone." Roman's hands were steady on the wheel, which means Elias becomes his primary asset. His only move is the records. "He'll make contact," she said. "He'll reach out tonight to negotiate." "To you or to me?" "To you. He doesn't know what I know yet." She paused. "He still thinks I'm furniture." Roman glanced at her. The highway light moved across his face in intervals. "Is that useful?" "It might be the most useful thing we have." They drove. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was functional. The particular quiet of two people processing the same problem from adjacent positions. Trees replaced buildings. The road narrowed further. She thought about Moretti's face when she'd said, "Pull your people," the resignation in it, the specific tiredness of a man who had been holding a difficult thing for a long time and was beginning to understand that it wasn't going to resolve the way he'd planned. She thought about what he'd said. "Your father protected Roman years ago, sacrificing his freedom to stop a war." She hadn't let herself sit with that yet, had filed it and kept moving because the room had required it. She let herself sit with it now. Her father had found evidence of a federal betrayal, had gone to Moretti instead of running, had chosen the harder things, the thing that put himself in the path of the consequences, because the alternative was a syndicate war that would have cost more lives than his freedom was worth. She had spent 4 years believing her father had been swallowed by something he'd built. Understanding now that he'd chosen to be swallowed, that the choice was the specific kind her father made, the kind she'd watched him make when she was young, the kind that looked like weakness from the outside and was something else entirely from the inside. She pressed her fingers against the cold window glass and felt the vibration of the road through it. "He was protecting you too," she said. Roman didn't answer immediately. "The federal records," she said. If they'd surfaced during the transition when Roman took over the organization, the prosecution exposure would have been catastrophic, Roman said. "Yes." A pause. "I knew the records existed in theory. An attorney I trust mentioned them as a historical liability. I didn't know your father had them specifically until you visited him. Until I visited him, 2 years ago." He exhaled. "He didn't tell me everything. He told me the records were safe, that they'd never be used as a weapon against people who didn't deserve it. He told me..." Another pause. "He told me to take care of you." Those were the words he used. Take care of her, not protect, not watch. Take care of. She turned to look at him. Roman was watching the road. "I didn't know what to do with that," he said. "It wasn't an instruction I'd been given before." She looked at his profile in the dark car. The scar on his jaw, the hands on the wheel, the particular quality of stillness in a man who was being more honest with her than he'd been in 3 years and understanding it clearly himself. "You put me in the silver dress," she said. "I wanted you visible," he said, "for reasons I told myself were operational." "Were they?" "Partially." His jaw moved. "The other part I was less clear on." She turned back to the window. The road was pure dark now, trees on both sides, the headlights carving a limited clarity out of the night. "Don't," she said. "I know what you were doing," she said. "And I need to be able to think clearly for the next hour, so don't." A beat. "Understood," he said. The property was set back from the county road behind a tree line, the gravel access road marked only by a rusted mailbox post with no mailbox. Roman cut the headlights 200 meters out, and they rolled the last section in the dark with the windows down, listening. No visible light from the structure, which meant blackout curtains or no one there or both. Roman stopped the car, and they sat for 30 seconds. "Two scenarios," he said low. "Bassett is inside with Elias and people. Or Bassett is not here, and Elias is here with people." "Bassett is here," she said. "If the records are what he wants, he needs to be present to negotiate for them. He'll have made contact by now if he was going to. He'll have tried your primary phone, which you don't have." She paused. "He'll be recalibrating. He moved your father to use him as leverage, and his leverage opportunity just changed shape." She thought through it. "He needs a new approach. He needs to reach you on terms he controls, which means he's waiting for you to come to him." Roman looked at her in the dark. "He knows I'll come," Roman said. "He knows you'll come because he knows about me," she said. It landed as she said it, the full shape of it. "He moved my father before the gala because he knew I was a variable. He's known about me longer than Moretti has. He was watching me at the gala tonight, the way he reacted to my name, the way he pulled back from the conversation." "He wasn't reacting to your name," Roman said. His voice changed on the word. Quieter. Specific. The voice he used when he reached something he didn't like. "He was reacting to seeing you with me." She went still. "Bassett has been in the financial infrastructure for 6 years," Roman said. "He has access to everything that moves through the organization's accounts, including—" He stopped. "Including what?" Roman looked at the dark property ahead of them. 3 months ago, I moved funds from an operational account to a separate holding structure," he said. "Personal funds, designated for a specific purpose." A pause. "Elias's release. I had been working toward a board resolution, a legal framework to close the facility, release the remaining asset, process it as a historical liability closure. The funds were for his relocation and support after. Bassett would have seen that transfer." She understood. "He knew you were planning to release my father," she said. "He knew I was planning to release the only other person alive who had access to the federal records." Roman's hands tightened on the wheel. "From Bassett's position, that's an existential threat. Those records contain evidence that implicates everyone who was part of the organization during the predecessor's era, everyone who knew about the federal deal and didn't report it." He paused. "Including Bassett." "He was there," she said, "during the predecessor's era." "He was the predecessor's financial director," Roman said. "He structured the deal. He built the accounts the federal payout was supposed to flow through." His voice was flat and cold and very precise. "The records your father has would put Theo Bassett in federal prison for the rest of his life." The dark property sat ahead of them in its tree line. She thought about Moretti's operation tonight, the precision of it, the resources, the mezzanine setup, 9 men, coverage on all exits, a performance designed to end Roman publicly, and simultaneously moving her father using a clearance code, rerouting an asset before the chaos started. 2 parallel operations. Moretti's play for the organization, Bassett's play for the records. Neither of them had known about the other, or had they? "Roman," she said carefully. "Crane by Mkolkin, your event team assistant. The inside contact. Yes. You said he'd been with the organization 14 months. Correct." Who hired him? Roman's jaw moved. Bassett hired him, Roman said. So Bassett knew about Moretti's operation, she said. He positioned his own inside contact to feed Moretti the access he needed. He wasn't parallel to Moretti's operation. He was enabling it. She worked through it, the pieces settling into the shape she hadn't seen until now. Bassett wanted you dead tonight, but he couldn't do it himself, too exposed, too traceable. So he handed Moretti the tools and let Moretti take the risk. If Moretti succeeded, Bassett moves my father with the records and disappears before anyone understands what he took. If Moretti failed, he still has the records, Roman said. And now he has leverage. And you'll come to him because you need what my father has, she said. And because... She stopped. Because I'm here, she said. Roman looked at her. He knows you'll come, she said again. Not because of the records, because I'm with you. She said it without inflection, as a tactical assessment. He's been watching you for 3 years, and he's been watching me for longer than that. He knows. Roman's expression was doing the thing it did when he was choosing between several true things to say and deciding which one was least dangerous. He's going to use me to get the records from my father, she said. That's the play. My father will give them to Bassett if Bassett has me, and my father will give them to Roman if I ask him to, which means whoever controls you controls the outcome, Roman said. The word controls landed wrong, and she felt Roman register that it had. Poor choice of words, he said. Yes. Celeste. A light came on in the structure ahead of them. One window, ground floor, a signal or a coincidence, and she didn't believe in coincidences. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Not the same one as Harlan Webb. She answered. Miss Arden? Theo Bassett's voice was the same as it had been in the ballroom. Rehearsed, warm, the social precision of a man who had spent his career making dangerous things sound reasonable. I'm glad you're here. I wasn't sure you'd come. She kept her voice even. Where is my father? He's comfortable. He's well. A pause. He'd like to see you. I imagine you'd like to see him. What do you want, Bassett? I want a conversation. That's all this is. The warmth dropped 1/2 degree. Come to the front door, both of you. The call ended. She looked at the phone for 1 second. Then she looked at Roman. His face in the dark was doing the calculation. She could see it happening. The rapid cold assessment of variables and outcomes, and the specific geometry of a problem that had 2 people at its center and no clean solution. He's been watching us come up the road, she said. He has cameras on the approach. I know. If he has 4 armed men inside, we walk in, and we don't walk out. I know. If we don't go in, he has my father and the records, and he disappears. I know. Roman looked at the lit window. The facility staff member who called you. Webb. Yes. If Webb is inside that building and can confirm your father's location, we have a witness. We have the transfer paperwork anomaly. We have enough for a federal inquiry that makes Bassett untouchable. The wrong kind of untouchable. He paused. If Bassett hurts your father, or those records surface under his control, the exposure runs both directions. He knows that. He's not going to move against us inside that building. You're betting on his self-interest holding. I'm always betting on self-interest holding, Roman said. It's the only thing that reliably does. She thought about her father sitting in a room 3 hours north, 40 minutes north now. She thought about 4 years of silence and the specific sound of his voice saying, I know you're safe through a grainy phone screen. She thought about the specific quality of Bassett's voice when he'd said both of you, the way a man said a thing when he'd already positioned the room. He's going to try to separate us, she said. Inside. Yes. Don't let him. I won't. She opened the car door. The night air was cold and smelled like pine and wet earth, and the particular freshness of a place that didn't know yet what it was about to contain. She walked across the gravel toward the front of the structure, Roman's presence at her shoulder steady as something load-bearing, the lit window ahead of them throwing a pale rectangle onto the dark ground. The front door opened before they reached it. Bassett stood in the frame. He'd changed from the gala. No suit jacket now, shirt sleeves rolled to the forearm. the studied casualness of a man trying to communicate that this was a conversation between reasonable people. He was holding nothing in his hands, which was a choice she noticed. 2 men were visible behind him, possibly more beyond the light. "Roman," Bassett said, "you should have died tonight." "You made 2 mistakes," Roman said. "Moretti was the first." "And the second?" Roman looked at him with the specific expression Celeste had seen him use exactly twice in 3 years, the expression that meant the calculation was complete and the outcome was already determined, the only question being how long the other person took to understand it. "You underestimated my furniture," Roman said. Bassett's eyes moved to Celeste, and in that half-second of recalibration, in the doorway of a property that didn't officially exist under a sky that had gone from rain to a cold, clear dark, she saw it. Not fear exactly, but the adjacent thing, the specific look of a man who has built his entire position on the assumption that certain people don't matter and is standing in the moment when the assumption collapsed behind Bassett's eyes in real time, and Celeste watched it happen with the cold clarity of someone who had spent 3 years learning to read the faces of dangerous men. He recovered fast. She'd give him that. "Come in," he said. The warmth was entirely gone now. What replaced it was the functional courtesy of a man conducting a transaction. He stepped back from the doorway. She went first. The interior was a converted farmhouse. Original bones, the low ceilings and thick walls of a structure built before anyone cared about aesthetics, retrofitted with the specific utilitarian upgrades of a space designed for extended occupation rather than living. Fluorescent lighting, a folding table with laptops and equipment, the smell of coffee, and something older and more institutional underneath it. 2 men flanked the entry, both armed, both positioned in the way that communicated this is containment, not conversation. A third was visible through a doorway to the left. Half his face, one shoulder, the barrel of a weapon angled down. She counted the exits on the walk to the folding table. Front door behind her. 1 window left, 1 right, both shuttered. The doorway to the left. A corridor ahead that turned, she could see the corner of it, toward what she assumed was the structure's rear. 4 exits. 3 armed men visible. Minimum 1 more she hadn't placed yet. Bassett stood on the opposite side of the table. He hadn't invited them to sit, and there were no chairs on their side, which was a choice that communicated the architecture of the situation clearly. Roman stood beside her, close enough that she felt the heat of him but not touching, and she appreciated the specific intelligence of that, present, not protective, the difference between a man who understood her capabilities and one who didn't. "The records," Bassett said. No preamble. The social machinery was entirely gone. "Where's my father?" she said. "Comfortable. As I said. I want to see him. After." "No." She held his gaze. "Now. Before any other conversation happens." Bassett looked at her for a long moment. The calculation was visible, not because he was sloppy, but because the calculation was large and some of its weight showed. He was a financial architect. He thought in structures and leverage points, in the load-bearing relationships between things. He was trying to assess what refusing her cost against what agreeing cost, and whether either number was manageable. He nodded to the man in the left doorway. 30 seconds of silence, then footsteps. Then her father walked through the doorway, and Celeste stood very still and breathed through what looking at him did to her chest. Elias Arden was 61 years old, and 4 years of institutional walls had done specific things to him. Thinner in the face, the particular pallor of someone who had spent too long under fluorescent light, a careful quality to his movement that looked like caution, but she recognized as assessment. He was reading the room the same way she was. The same eyes, the same method. He looked at her. "Celeste," he said. Her name in his voice after 4 years was a physical thing. She didn't move. She kept her face still because the alternative was not available to her right now. Not here, not in front of Bassett and his armed men, not in a room where any display of weakness was a resource she couldn't afford to give away. "Are you hurt?" she said. "No." He looked at Roman. Something moved between them. Complex, accumulated, the specific look of two people who have had a conversation that only they know the content of. Roman. Elias, Roman said. Bassett let this run for 4 seconds and then said, "The records." Celeste looked at her father. He looked back at her with the eyes she'd inherited and the expression she'd learned to read before she learned to read words. The expression that said, "I have a plan, and I need you to trust it, and I need you to not react to what I'm about to say." "The records are in a safe deposit box," her father said. He was addressing Bassett, but his eyes were on her for a half-second longer than necessary. "Downtown. Box number registered under a name you don't have." "You'll give me the name," Bassett said. "I'll give you access." Elias paused. "When my daughter walks out of this building." Bassett shook his head. "She stays until I have the box number and the access code." "Then we have a problem," Elias said, "because I'm the only person who knows both, and I don't negotiate with my daughter in the room." The authority in his voice was specific and intact. 4 years, and it was still there. The particular quality of a man who had built things that lasted and knew what durability felt like from the inside. Celeste felt something behind her sternum that she was not going to name right now. Bassett looked between them. "I want the name and the code," he said. "Then she leaves. Then you leave. Then Roman and I discuss the organizational implications." "No," Roman said. Everyone looked at him. "No one leaves separately," Roman said. His voice was the flat cold that she'd heard him use when a negotiation was over and the only question was consequences. "We all leave together, or we discuss what the federal inquiry into Vantage Meridian Holdings looks like from the inside of a very uncomfortable room." Bassett's expression changed. "You don't have—" "Carl has been running the filing chain for 20 minutes, Roman said. "By now he has the full ownership structure, the capital account transfers, the transfer order for this facility, the clearance code use." He paused. "You know who Carl is." Bassett knew who Carl was. The specific tightening around his eyes confirmed it. "The federal records implicate you whether they surface or not," Roman said. "Because now I know you exist in them. And you can make me disappear tonight, which you've now failed at twice. Or you can understand that your position is worse than it was this morning and work with that reality." It was a good argument. It was the argument of a man who had done this for 20 years and understood the specific geometry of leverage. She watched Bassett absorb it, run it, check it against his own architecture, and she watched the man behind Bassett's right shoulder move. Not the two at the door, the one she hadn't placed yet, the fourth man, who had come in from the corridor while Bassett and Roman were talking, while everyone's attention was forward-facing, who was now standing 8 feet inside the room with a weapon raised and the specific expression of a man who had received an instruction she hadn't heard. She moved before the thought completed. She hit Roman from the left with her shoulder, driving him sideways, and the shot that had been aimed at him cracked through the space his chest had occupied half a second earlier and punched through the shutter on the right wall with a sound like a hammer on wood. Everything happened at once. The 2 men at the door responded to the shot by going to weapons. Reflex, not instruction, the problem with armed men in enclosed spaces when shooting starts. Her father dropped behind the folding table with the trained speed of someone who had thought about this moment. Roman recovered his footing and went for the nearest man at the door with the specific economy she'd seen in the stairwell at the gala, which meant it was very fast and very certain. She had no weapon. She'd walked in without one because the 2 men at the door had done a check at the entry that she hadn't mentioned to Roman because arguing about it would have cost time they didn't have. She had walked in clean, and she was standing in the middle of a room with 4 armed men and her father behind a table, and Roman handling the entry problem, and the fourth man, the one who'd fired, was reacquiring. She took the folding laptop off the table and threw it. Not at the man, at the fluorescent fixture above him. The laptop hit the fixture mount, and the fixture came down. Not fully, but enough. The ballast housing cracking and the tube flickering to a strobing half-darkness that was specifically terrible for target acquisition in a small space. The fourth man flinched up, and she was already moving, low, using the table's length as cover, coming up on his weapon side because she'd mapped his position relative to the table in the first 5 seconds of being in the room. She got both hands on the weapon. What followed was not elegant. It was 30 seconds of two people with competing claims on a single object in a small space with a strobing light and the sounds of Roman working through a different problem at the door. Her shoulder hit the wall, her knee hit the floor. The gun went off once, into the ceiling, the shot splitting the air next to her left ear with a pressure that she felt rather than heard, a sensation that would become sound after a delay of approximately 2 seconds. She got the gun. She stood up. The fourth man was on the floor and she was standing over him, breathing in the specific way of someone who has just spent 30 seconds at the edge of a very bad outcome. Her hands were steady. She noticed that about herself and then noticed the blood on her palm from somewhere and set both observations aside. The room was still. Roman was at the door. One man down, one against the wall with Roman's forearm across his throat at a pressure that communicated the full range of outcomes clearly. Bassett had not moved from behind the table. His hands were up, the hands of a man who built things with financial instruments and understood that the current room was outside his area of professional competence. The fourth man she'd taken the gun from was watching her from the floor with an expression she categorized as reassessment. Her father stood up from behind the table. He looked at her. She looked at him. "Your mother's eyes," he said. But that was all her too. Something cracked in her chest that she absolutely was not going to deal with right now. "Are you hurt?" she said again. "I'm fine." He looked at her hands. "You're bleeding." "I know." "Celeste, I know, Dad." The word came out before she decided to say it, and she heard what it did to the room. Roman's attention shifting, Bassett recalibrating, her father's expression doing something that she recognized because she'd felt the same thing 10 minutes ago when she'd heard his voice. "I need 30 more seconds to finish this, and then we can—" She stopped. 30 seconds. He nodded. Her father nodded like he recognized the particular mechanism of hold it together until the work is done because he taught it to her by example. She turned to Bassett. "The clearance code," she said. "You used Roman's organization's infrastructure to move my father. You enabled Moretti's access to the gala. You built a parallel financial structure designed to give you an exit if the federal records surfaced." She kept her voice even and the gun down at her side. "That's the architecture. The question is what you were going to do with the records once you had them." Bassett looked at her. His hands were still up. The rehearsed warmth was entirely gone, and what was left was the face underneath. Older than the social version, more tired. The face of a man who had spent 20 years managing a risk that had been compounding the whole time. "Destroy them," he said. "They're the only thing protecting the people who built the organization," she said. "If you destroy them, those people have no leverage and no protection, and the federal exposure runs open." "The federal exposure runs to me specifically," Bassett said. "I was the architect of the deal. My signature is on the accounts." He lowered his hands slowly. She let him. The gesture was not aggression. It was exhaustion. "I've spent 6 years inside Roman's organization with that signature sitting in your father's box, waiting. 6 years. So you decided to move." "I decided to survive." His voice was flat, not apologetic. The voice of a man who had run the numbers and arrived at a conclusion and lived inside it long enough to stop feeling its edges. "The records are a liability for everyone in them. Destroying them helps everyone." "Except my father," she said. Bassett said nothing. "He spent 4 years in a facility because of what he knew," she said. "Destroying the records doesn't give him those 4 years back. It just means no one is accountable for them." Accountability in this context means federal prison for 12 to 15 people. "Yes," she said. "Including people who had nothing to do with your father's imprisonment, people who were lower in the chain, who didn't have the authority to—" "Bassett." She said his name and he stopped. "I'm not interested in your cost-benefit analysis for other people's accountability." She paused. "The records belong to my father. What happens to them is his decision, not yours, not Roman's." She looked at Roman. "Not anyone else's." Roman was watching her from the door. His forearm had dropped from the man against the wall. He was standing free, hands at his sides, and his expression was the specific one she'd been trying to categorize for 3 years, the one that lived in the space between the man he performed and the man underneath, in the moments when the performance got too heavy to hold. Agreed, Roman said. Bassett's jaw worked. He looked at Elias. Elias looked back at him with the patient stillness of a man who had spent 4 years learning to wait. The box, Bassett said. You actually have a box. No, Elias said. I don't. Bassett stared at him. The records are digital, Elias said. Have been for 2 years. The box was a thing I told you tonight to buy time. He looked at Celeste. They're on a server with a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 72 hours with a specific code, they release to 3 federal addresses and 2 journalists I trust. Silence. Bassett made a sound that was not quite a laugh. You've been running that for 2 years, he said. Since I understood what Moretti was actually holding me for, Elias said. The facility's administrative system has vulnerabilities that gave me limited access to external networks. Limited, but sufficient. Celeste looked at her father. He looked back at her with the expression she now fully recognized. He'd been doing what she'd been doing. The same method. The same patient construction of an exit inside a situation that didn't have one. Building a leverage structure from inside a cell the way she'd built a map of the organization from inside its administrative machinery. 4 years of parallel work, and neither of them had known about the other. She felt something that might have been the specific bittersweet weight of loving someone you recognize too completely. The switch, Bassett said. His voice was different now. Stripped of the last layer of management, the voice of a man doing final arithmetic. You check in, or it releases. Correct. If something happens to you tonight, then it releases, Elias said simply. Which is the point. Bassett looked at the room, at Roman, at Celeste with the gun, at his own men in their various states of having lost the evening. He was 60 years old, and the risk he'd been managing for 20 years had just restructured itself into something he could not dismantle through the tools he had. She watched him arrive at the same place Moretti had arrived on the mezzanine. The specific moment when a man who built his power through arrangement and architecture understood that the architecture had changed shape and his position inside it had changed with it. I want immunity, he said. That's not something either of us can give you, Roman said. Then I want the record sealed. That's not our decision, Celeste said. She looked at her father. Elias was quiet for a moment. There's a prosecutor I've been in contact with, he said, through the same network access, for 18 months. He looked at Bassett. She knows the records exist. She knows the scope of what's in them. She doesn't know where they are. He paused. She's been waiting. The room absorbed that. You've been building a case from inside the facility, Roman said. It was not quite a question. I've been building a path, Elias said. There's a difference. A case requires evidence in hand. A path requires arrangements, people in position, a moment when the room has the right people in it. He looked at Celeste, then at Roman, then back at Bassett. This is closer to that moment than I expected to get this quickly. Celeste looked at her father and felt the specific feeling of understanding someone from the inside. The same patience, the same construction, the same willingness to stay inside a difficult thing until the structure was complete, rather than forcing an exit before it was ready. She had her father's methodology. She had just never known she'd inherited it from a man who was actively using it 4 years into an imprisonment he'd chosen to treat as an operational position. Bassett, she said, your signature is on the accounts. You built the structure for the federal deal. That's in the records. She paused. But you also kept my father alive for 4 years when Roman's predecessor wanted him dead. That's also in the records. She let that land. Which version of Theo Bassett the prosecutor sees depends on what happens in this room tonight. Bassett looked at her. You're offering me something, he said slowly. I'm offering you the difference between the man who obstructed and the man who cooperated, she said. That's not nothing. It's not immunity. No, she said. It's not immunity. It's the difference between what you built and what you're willing to do about it. She paused. That's the only offer on the table. Bassett was quiet for a long time. The strobing light had settled into a damaged half-flicker that made the room feel like a space between things, between the night that had already happened and the morning that hadn't started yet. He lowered his hands. The Harmon brothers, he said. Eastern Dock Operations. They were the conduit for the federal deal. They moved the funds, and they have their own records of the transaction separate from mine. He paused. If you want the full picture, you want them. Roman straightened slightly. I can get you the Harmon brothers' account structure, Bassett said. Documentation I kept as insurance, 18 years of it. His voice was flat and practical, and she understood it as the voice of a man who had just decided which version of himself to be and was committing to the decision with the same precision he brought to financial architecture. That's what I'm trading. To who? Roman said. To whoever is standing in this room when the sun comes up, Bassett said. She looked at Roman. Roman looked at her. There were things happening in his expression that she could read now with a clarity she hadn't had 3 hours ago. The specific combination of calculation and something more human than calculation running simultaneously, neither one fully controlling the other. He was doing the math on Bassett's offer, and he was also looking at her in the way that made the math harder, and she watched him understand both of those things about himself in real time. I need to make a call, Roman said to the room. He walked to the far end of the corridor. She turned to her father. He was looking at her with the patient attention of a man who had been waiting for this specific moment for 4 years. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him. He looked the same, and he looked entirely different, and she looked at him and understood that this was what 4 years of separation meant. Not the loss of knowing someone, but the accumulation of all the time you didn't know them, all the versions they became that you didn't see, all the weight of the parallel experience that you'd been carrying on different tracks. I was going to burn it all down, she said. Her voice was very quiet. To find you. I know, he said. You let me think you were dead. I know. His voice was low and exact. I'm sorry. She breathed. You were protecting me, she said. I was trying to. He paused. I didn't want you to see me like that. What I'd become. What the situation had made of me. He looked at her hands, the blood on her palm, the gun. But you built yourself into someone who could handle a room like this one, which I probably should have factored in. You absolutely should have factored that in, she said. Something moved through his face, not quite a smile, the wrong word for it, but something in the same region. Your mother would have said the same thing, he said. She pressed her lips together. Breathed through it. We're leaving, she said. Tonight. All of us. The prosecutor. After. We call her after. Tonight we leave. She looked at him directly. I've waited 4 years. I can get you out of this room before I make any other decisions about what comes next. Her father looked at her for a long moment with the eyes she'd been seeing in her own mirror for 24 years. Okay, he said. Roman came back from the corridor. He looked at Celeste. Something in how he held himself was different. Not resolved. Nothing about tonight was resolved, but settled. The specific quality of a man who had made a decision he was going to live inside for the long term. Carl is processing the Bassett documentation, he said. He'll have it structured by morning. He looked at Bassett. You ride with us. I ride with you, Bassett said, or you ride without anyone. That's what I said. Bassett looked at his men. He gave them the specific look of a man reducing his organizational infrastructure in real time. Dismissive, final, the look that meant you don't work for me after tonight. 2 of them left through the rear corridor without a word. The man against the wall followed. The 4th man on the floor looked at Celeste. She stepped back. He stood up and left. Bassett straightened his shirt sleeves. One thing, he said to Roman. What? The Harmon brothers will know I moved against them the moment this breaks. He paused. They have people. Not the organization's people, their own. Dockside. They've been building independent capability for 3 years. Roman absorbed this. How many? He said. Enough. Bassett's voice was flat. They've been waiting for an opportunity like tonight. If they pick up that the gala operation failed and Moretti is blown, they'll move. They have nothing left to lose, and they've been wanting out from under the syndicate structure since the window on the left side of the room exploded inward. Glass across the floor, cold air, and the smell of pine and something burning. Celeste was moving before she finished identifying the sound, grabbing her father's arm, driving him toward the corridor, away from the window and the front door and both points of exposure. Roman had Bassett by the jacket, not gentle. "How far out?" Roman said. Bassett's face had changed. The controlled negotiator was gone, and what was left was a man who understood that he'd miscalculated the timeline. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know how fast they—" A second window, rear of the structure, the sound of a vehicle on the gravel approach. Not one, two. She had her father in the corridor, back against the wall, the gun in her right hand and her left hand on his arm, and her pulse at a rate she was aware of but could not afford to think about. She looked at Roman. He was looking at the front door. Through the broken window she could see headlights. Not one pair. 3. "Bassett," Roman said. His voice was very quiet. "I didn't contact them," Bassett said. "I didn't. They must have had this location under watch. They knew about the property. How many people do they have?" Bassett's jaw worked. "Bassett." The word snapped. 12, Bassett said. "Minimum. They've been building for 3 years," I said. Roman looked at Celeste. 12 men. 3 vehicles. 1 exit through a rear corridor she hadn't mapped. 2 people she needed to get out of the building alive. 1 gun. Roman, who she'd watched work with brutal efficiency in 2 separate situations tonight, and who was bleeding from a cut above his left eyebrow that she hadn't noticed until the headlights caught it. He looked back at her. No calculation in his expression now. Something more direct than calculation, the part of Roman Virelli that lived underneath the machinery, looking at her with the specific attention of a man who is about to do something irreversible and wants to look at the right thing first. "The rear corridor," she said. "I don't know where it goes." "Neither do I, but it goes away from the front door. They'll have people at the back." "Fewer than the front." He looked at her for one more second. Then he looked at her father. "Elias," he said, "can you run?" Her father looked at him. "I've been waiting 4 years to," he said. The front door splintered. Celeste grabbed her father's hand and ran. The corridor was dark and narrow, and the floor was uneven, and she ran with her father's hand in hers, and Roman behind her, and the sounds of the front door giving way behind them, and the specific chaos of 12 men entering a building they'd been told was hostile, which meant they'd be moving fast and hard and without the kind of restraint that required conversation. The corridor ended in a door. She hit it with her shoulder. Cold air and darkness and the pine smell and a slope of ground dropping away from the structure's rear toward a tree line that was 40 feet away and absolutely dark beyond. 2 men stood between her and the trees. She raised the gun. Roman was already moving. What happened in the next 20 seconds was the fastest and least clean thing she'd experienced in a night that had contained multiple candidates for that title. Roman took the first man with the specific violent economy she'd seen twice before, bone against bone, the sound of it, the specific brief grunt of a person who has been damaged efficiently. The second man got a hand on Roman's jacket, and she came in from the left and drove the gun butt into the back of his knee joint with enough force that she felt the impact up to her shoulder. He went down. Roman was bleeding harder now. The eyebrow cut had opened up in the movement, and there was blood along the line of his jaw mixing with the earlier things the evening had done to him. He looked at her. She looked at him. Her father stood 3 feet behind her, breathing hard in the cold night air. The tree line was 30 feet. Behind them, inside the structure, the sound of men moving through rooms, fast, organized, the acoustic pattern of a search in progress. "Go," Roman said. She looked at him. "Celeste." His voice was stripped of everything except the essential. "Go." "You're coming." "I need 30 seconds. There's something in the front room, Bassett's documentation, the physical files he said he'd—" "Roman, 30 seconds." He looked at her with the specific expression she'd been trying to categorize all night, the one she now had a word for. She hadn't let herself use the word yet, but she had it. 30 seconds, and I'm right behind you. She looked at him. He held her gaze. "If you're not out in 30 seconds, she said, I'll be out in 25. She grabbed her father's arm and ran for the tree line. 20 seconds. She counted them. The trees closed around them. Cold branches, wet pine needles. the ground uneven under her feet in the silver dress that had now survived more than any piece of clothing should be asked to survive. Her father was keeping pace beside her. Thinner, yes, 4 years lighter, but the muscle memory of a man who had not stopped moving in a small space for 4 years was still there. 15 seconds. She stopped at the first substantial tree and turned back. The rear door of the structure was visible through the trees, lit from inside, the damaged fluorescent still strobing its half-broken rhythm. 20 seconds. No one came through the door. 25. Her father's hand tightened on her arm. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the door. 30. The sound of shouting from inside, the specific sound of confrontation, voices, the acoustic signature of a struggle, something breaking. 35. Celeste, her father said. 40, she said. Celeste. The rear door opened. Roman came through it at speed, moving with the specific controlled urgency of someone who has sustained damage and is not letting the damage control the movement. He had something under his left arm, a document folder, thick, the specific bulk of physical files. His right hand was empty, but there was blood on it that was not all from the eyebrow cut. Behind him, through the open door, one of the Harmon brothers' men appeared. She raised the gun. She fired. Not at the man. At the door frame above his head, high, precise, the specific shot of someone who is communicating stop rather than die. And the man did stop, dropping back inside by reflex. And in those 3 seconds, Roman covered the distance to the tree line and came into the dark beside her, breathing hard. She looked at his face. "You said 25 seconds, she said. "I had to look for the files," he said. "Roman, I found them." He looked at her, the blood on his jaw, the specific expression underneath the damage. "I'm here," she breathed. Behind them in the structure, the organized search was resolving into understanding. Understanding that the rear was compromised, that their targets were in the tree line, that the window of clean pursuit was closing as every second put more dark and more trees between them and the building. Her father touched her shoulder. She turned. He was looking at Roman. Roman was looking at him. Between them something passed that was neither accusation nor absolution, but was in the territory between them. The specific look of 2 men who had each done things to the other that had no clean accounting. "The trees go north for about 1 kilometer, her father said. "I walked this property when they brought me in. There's a county road on the far side." Roman looked at him. "You mapped the exit when they brought you here," Roman said. "I mapped every exit of every place I've been for 4 years, Elias said. Roman looked at Celeste. She could see it happening. The understanding arriving, the specific recognition of a man who has spent 20 years being the most dangerous person in any room he entered, looking at a woman and her father and understanding something about the particular inheritance that moved between them. "North," she said. She looked at her father. She looked at Roman. "Both of you, keep up." She moved into the trees. Behind her, the building's lights strobed their broken rhythm. The Harmon brothers' men were regrouping. The night was cold, and the ground was dark, and the 3 of them moved through the tree line with the urgent quiet of people who understood that what was behind them was not finished, and what was ahead of them was not yet visible, and the only available option was. The trees gave them cover but not silence. Behind them, through the dark and the wet pine, she could hear the Harmon brothers' men working the perimeter of the structure. Voices carrying in the cold air, the sweep of flashlight beams cutting between trunks in patterns that told her they'd sent people into the tree line within 40 seconds of losing visual. Organized. Faster than she'd hoped. She moved north and kept moving. Her father was beside her, matching her pace with the specific determination of a man who had spent 4 years in a small space rebuilding himself for exactly this kind of movement. Not graceful, not fast, but steady in the way that outlasted fast. Roman was 3 steps behind, the document folder under his arm, his breathing controlled and deliberate over something that was costing him more than his expression communicated. She didn't ask, not now. The tree line was dense and the ground sloped unevenly, and the silver dress had long since stopped being clothing and become simply the thing she was wearing while she ran through a pine forest at midnight. A branch caught her shoulder. She registered the sting and kept moving. 200 meters in, Her father touched her arm. She stopped. He pointed left. In the dark, she couldn't see what he was pointing at. Then she heard it. The specific sound of running water, small and close, a drainage channel cutting through the tree floor. Her father moved to it and crouched, and she understood. Water flowing meant gradient, meant the channel ran downhill, meant it likely met the county road at the low point of the property's northern edge. She looked at Roman. He had heard it too. He nodded. They moved along the channel's edge, using the sound to navigate, the water cold against her ankles when the channel's bank gave way twice, and she stepped through it rather than around it. Wet shoes on uneven ground. The flashlight beams were still visible behind them but losing ground. Whoever was in the tree line was moving in a grid pattern, systematic, which was methodical but not fast. 4 minutes. The trees thinned. The county road was a single lane of cracked asphalt that ran straight in both directions into more dark, bordered by the specific tired infrastructure of rural county maintenance. A reflective marker post, a drainage grating, a rusted mileage sign she couldn't read. No vehicles, no lights. They came out of the tree line and stood on the road's shoulder, and she listened. The pursuit was still in the trees, 90 seconds behind them, maybe less. "Which direction?" Roman said. Her father looked at the road, at the reflective marker, at the dark. "East," he said. "There was a service station. When they drove me in, it was the last thing I saw before they covered the windows, maybe 2 miles. She looked east. The road was dark and empty, and 2 miles was 25 minutes of walking or 12 minutes of running, and neither option was good when the men in the tree line reached the road. Roman was looking at the document folder in his hands. She watched him make a decision. "Give me 30 seconds, he said. He moved to the road center. He pulled out the secondary phone, still functional somehow, which said something about the quality of hardware Roman Virelli carried. He made a call that lasted 19 seconds. When he came back, he said, "Dex." She looked at him. "I said I trusted 2 people completely," he said. "Dex is one of them. He's been running dark since the gala. He's 20 minutes out." "We don't have 20 minutes." "I know." He looked at the tree line. "East. Move." They ran the first half mile. Not at full speed. Her father's 4 years showed in his lungs, even if not his will, and Roman was managing something on his right side that she'd identified as ribs and chosen not to address until they had the space to address it. She set the pace at the edge of what her father could sustain and held it there. The flashlight beams emerged from the tree line at the 3-minute mark. She heard the shout that meant they'd been spotted on the road. She ran harder. Her father ran harder. Roman kept pace and didn't make a sound about the ribs. The half mile became a mile. The road curved. Behind them, the beams were closer. The Harmon men had vehicles now. She could hear the engine, one of the 3 from the approach coming around the structure's far side to the county road. Headlights swept the curve behind them. Her father's breathing was ragged. "There," Roman said. The service station was not open. It was barely standing, as a 2-pump structure with a small cinder block building and a light above the door running on a timer that suggested someone still paid the electric bill even if no one worked here anymore. A gravel lot. A payphone that had probably stopped working before she was born. And beside the building, half concealed under a rusted metal overhang, a vehicle. Old pickup truck, the kind that aged into invisibility. She looked at her father. "Don't ask me if I can hotwire it," he said. "Ask me if I can do it in under a minute." "Can you?" "Probably." He was already moving toward the overhang. The headlights from the Harmon vehicle swept the road curve behind them. She put herself between the headlights and the overhang, and Roman stood beside her, and they watched the road with the specific stillness of people who have run out of running and are now operating in the space between options. The vehicle came around the curve. It slowed. She raised the gun. The vehicle stopped 30 feet away, headlights full on them. She could see nothing behind the lights except the silhouette of the vehicle and the engine running. Then the headlights cut. The driver's door opened. Dex stepped out. She stood with the gun raised for 1 full second before her brain caught up with what she was looking at. Dex? Roman's driver, the man who had never once made eye contact with her in 3 years, stood on the road in the specific unhurried posture of a man who had driven fast and arrived where he was needed. He looked at Roman. "You're bleeding," he said. "I'm aware," Roman said. Both sides now. I said I'm aware. Roman looked at the overhang. Elias. The pickup truck's engine turned over, coughed, caught. Her father emerged from the overhang, wiping his hands on his trousers with the specific satisfaction of someone whose estimate of under a minute had been accurate. He looked at Dex. Dex looked at him. Something passed between them that she didn't have the full context for and filed as a conversation for later. The Harmon vehicle is 2 minutes behind yours, she said to Dex. I saw it on the road, he said. 1 vehicle, 4 men. He looked at Roman. The brothers themselves aren't in it. Where are they? That's what I've been trying to find out for the last hour. Dex's voice was the particular flat of a man who delivered information without interpretation and left the interpretation to someone else. They left the city at 10:42. 2 vehicles. I lost them when they split on the highway. Roman was looking at the county road. She understood the problem before he said it. The Harmon brothers had 12 men at the farmhouse property. They had a vehicle 2 minutes behind them on this road, and the brothers themselves were somewhere in 2 separate vehicles that had split on the highway and gone dark. They're not coming here, she said. Roman looked at her. They don't care about the farmhouse anymore, she said. That was about the records and about us, and they've lost both. The brothers split on the highway because they're going somewhere else. She thought through it, the architecture of it, the specific logic of men who had spent 3 years building independent capability for a single purpose. If the Bassett documentation surfaces, the Harmon brothers' account structure, 18 years of it, the only thing that protects them is Roman. They want leverage, Roman said. They want a body, she said. Roman Virelli, dead is leverage. Dead, the organization fractures, the documentation loses its primary advocate, the federal inquiry has no principal witness. She paused. Where would they go? If they were looking for you, where would they go that they knew you'd eventually have to be? Roman was quiet for 3 seconds. Carl, he said. Dex drove at a speed that suggested he had a working relationship with the physics of the road and a flexible one with its posted limits. She sat in the back with her father. Roman was in the front. The Harmon vehicle that had been behind them on the county road attempted a pursuit for 4 minutes and then was simply no longer in the rear window, which she attributed to either Dex's skill or the fact that the men inside it had received new instructions. She held her father's hand in the dark of the back seat. He let her. They sat without talking for the first 10 minutes because there was too much to say, and the order of it hadn't resolved yet, and they were both the kind of people who would rather sit in accurate silence than fill it with the wrong words. The dead man's switch, she said finally. Real, he said. Everything I told Bassett was true. The prosecutor. Her name is Diane Voss. She's been in the federal building for 16 years. She's not someone who came to me. I went to her through the network access, and she could have shut it down or reported the contact, and she didn't. She asked questions. He paused. She asked very good questions for 18 months. She knows everything. She knows what I've told her, which is most of it. He looked at her in the dark. She doesn't know about you. I didn't tell her about you specifically. Why? Because I didn't want your name in a federal file until you were in a room where you could control what the file said about you. He paused. I was protecting you again. You have a problem with that, she said. I know. He looked at their hands. Your mother used to say I protected things to death, that I loved things and then built walls around them until the walls were the only thing left. She thought about that. She wasn't wrong, she said. No, he said. She wasn't. The city lights appeared on the horizon, dense and indifferent, the glow of a place that had been continuing its own business all night, while its ballrooms exploded and its county roads became running grounds. She watched the glow grow and felt the specific weight of returning, the way a city looks when you come back to it from somewhere that changed you. And the city hasn't changed at all, and you have to decide what to do with that gap. Roman's phone rang. He answered. She watched his shoulders from behind, the specific change in his posture that meant the call contained something he hadn't anticipated. He said 4 words. How long ago? Then he listened. Then he ended the call. Carl's building, he said. The brothers, she said. One vehicle. They're in the lobby. Carl is on the fourth floor and not answering his phone. Roman looked at Dex. How far? 8 minutes, Dex said. 6, Roman said. The car went faster. Bet. Carl's building had a lobby that had been upgraded once in the 1990s and left alone since. Marble that had yellowed to the color of old teeth, brass fixtures gone green, elevator doors that opened on a 3-second delay that felt longer when you were moving fast. She came through the front door behind Roman and saw the lobby empty, which was wrong. A building this size at midnight should have a security desk with someone behind it. The security desk had no one behind it. There was a phone off the hook. Roman looked at Dex. Dex moved left, toward the stairwell. Roman looked at Celeste. Your father stays here, he said. She looked at her father. Elias looked at her with the expression of a man who understood that stays here was the correct tactical decision and had complex feelings about correct tactical decisions where his daughter was concerned. Lobby, she said to him. Behind the desk. Stay down. Celeste, Dad. She held his gaze. I know what I'm doing. He looked at her for one long second. Then he moved behind the security desk and she turned and followed Roman to the stairs. The fourth floor was 4 units, Carl's at the end of the hall. The hallway light was on. One of the 4 doors was open, not Carl's, the unit across from it. The specific forced open look of a door that had been kicked rather than unlocked. She moved with Roman down the hall, staying close to the wall. And when they reached the open door, she looked through it fast and pulled back. 2 men inside. Waiting position, facing Carl's door. They'd come in through the neighboring unit to avoid the hallway. She held up 2 fingers to Roman. He nodded. She thought about the gun in her hand, the one she'd been carrying since the coat room at the gala, reloaded from the 4th man's magazine at the farmhouse, carrying 4 rounds now. She thought about the math of 4 rounds and 2 men in a room, plus whatever was in Carl's unit. She thought about the security guard downstairs with the phone off the hook. She moved into the doorway. Step away from the door, she said. Both men turned. She held the gun level, stance correct, and looked at them with the specific expression of someone who had been in enough situations tonight that the situation no longer had the power to alter her face. One of them calculated. Don't, she said. He didn't. Roman came through the door behind her. The next 45 seconds were not clean. They never were, she was learning. It was the primary lesson of the entire night that the movies were wrong about the cleanness of these things. But they were decisive, which was the only thing that mattered. One man went into the wall, one man went to the floor. Roman's ribs cost him something in the movement that she heard in his breathing, but he didn't stop. She checked the hallway. Clear. She crossed to Carl's door. Knocked. Carl. It's Celeste Arden. Roman is with me. Open the door. Silence. Then, how do I know Roman is actually with you and you're not being used to get me to open this door? Carl. Roman's voice, flat and tired and direct. Open the door. A pause, the sound of something heavy being moved. The door opened. Carl stood in the gap, looking worse than he'd looked 40 minutes ago, which was considerable. He was holding a fire extinguisher like a weapon, which she respected. They were in the building when you called, he said to Roman. I know. I'm sorry. You're sorry. Carl looked at the hallway, at the 2 men on the floor of the neighboring unit. He looked at Celeste. You're bleeding on my floor. She looked down at her palm. The cut from the farmhouse had opened again at some point. Where are the brothers? Roman said. I don't know. I heard 2 men come in downstairs. I assume those are yours now, but I haven't seen anyone else. Carl stepped back and let them in. His screens were still running, the financial data still populating in its scrolling columns. I've been processing the Bassett documentation you sent from the car. The Harmon account structure is Roman. It's comprehensive. The federal exposure is... He paused, seeming to realize he was narrating financials while people were bleeding on his floor. It's enough. More than enough. Diane Voss, she said, federal prosecutor. Do you have a contact pathway to her? Carl looked at her. I have pathways to most people. She needs the documentation tonight, before the Harmon brothers understand what Bassett gave us. Carl sat at his terminal, started moving. Roman touched her arm. The brothers are still out there. I know. If they're not in this building, then they're at the next place they think you'll be, she said. She looked at him. He looked back at her. Where do you go? After something like tonight, if you needed to be somewhere safe. Roman was quiet. There's a place, he said carefully. They know about it. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Then that's where we go, she said. We end this tonight. He looked at her for a moment with the expression she'd finally named. Somewhere between the gala and the farmhouse and the back seat of the car in the dark, she'd found the word for the thing that lived in Roman Virelli's face when he looked at her and wasn't performing the version of himself that ran organizations. The word was seen. The specific expression of a man who had spent most of his life being known for what he controlled and was sitting in the unfamiliar territory of being known for something else. You don't have to come, he said. She picked up the gun. The place was a building on the city's west side, a warehouse conversion that had been Roman's first property, purchased before the syndicate, before the consolidation, when he was 23 and had nothing but a sharp mind and a willingness to live inside difficult situations until they resolved in his favor. He'd kept it for 20 years. It was not in any organizational record. It was registered under a name that went back further than the syndicate did. Dex drove them. Her father was in the car. She hadn't been able to leave him at the lobby. He sat beside her and didn't argue, and she was grateful for both. Roman said nothing on the drive. He sat in the front with Dex and looked out the window at the city moving past, and she watched his profile in the passing light and thought about the cost of the night, the specific accounting of it, all the things that had been spent and couldn't be recovered, the gala's dead and wounded, the trust structures that had been proved hollow, the 4 years of her father's life in institutional walls, the 2 years of Roman's knowing silence. She thought about what was left after you subtracted all of that. She wasn't sure yet. She thought it might be something. She was reserving judgment until she could see it in daylight. The warehouse building was dark from outside. Roman looked at it for a long moment. They're inside, he said. She looked at the building, no visible light, no visible vehicles. But Roman had spent 20 years learning to read the specific quality of darkness that contained people versus the darkness that didn't. How many? She said. The brothers came in 2 vehicles. At least 4 people. He paused. The brothers themselves, which means the number is exactly what I can handle or slightly more. She looked at her father. He looked back at her with the expression she recognized. The dead man's switch, she said. Check in time. Elias looked at his watch. 4 hours. If we call Voss now, if she has the documentation and knows the location, she can't move in 4 hours, her father said. Not legitimately. A federal operation takes... I know how long it takes, she said. I'm not asking her to move tonight. I'm asking her to know. She looked at Roman. If the Harmon brothers understand that a federal prosecutor already has the documentation, that moving against you tonight doesn't protect them, it only adds to the case. They have no reason to be in that building. If they understand that, Roman said. So we tell them. Roman looked at her. We walk in, she said, and we tell them. They'll shoot us when we open the door. Not if they know that shooting us triggers the dead man's switch and puts their full account history in federal hands before morning. She held his gaze. Your father built this organization on leverage. You rebuilt it the same way. Tonight ends the same way. She paused. We walk in. We tell them what they're holding, and we offer them the same thing I offered Bassett. The difference between obstruction and cooperation. Yes. Roman looked at the building for a long moment. Celeste, he said. What? If this doesn't work the way you've drawn it, it'll work, she said. How do you know? She thought about her father in a cell building, a dead man's switch, and a federal contact over 4 years of limited network access. She thought about herself in Roman's organization for 3 years, mapping the architecture from the inside. She thought about the specific inheritance of people who survived by understanding systems better than the systems understood themselves. Because the Harmon brothers are businessmen, she said. Same as Bassett, same as Moretti. They built infrastructure for the same reason everyone in that ballroom tonight built infrastructure, to survive. And survival calculus only works if the inputs are accurate. She looked at the building. We give them accurate inputs. Dex looked at Roman in the rearview mirror. Roman looked back. Some communication passed between them that didn't require language. The specific shorthand of two people who had been in difficult rooms together for long enough that the rooms had become a shared dialect. Roman opened his door. The warehouse interior was exactly what she'd expected from a building Roman had owned for 20 years. Utilitarian, functional, the bones of a space that had been used for serious work and never dressed up for anything. Concrete floors, high ceilings, the smell of metal and old wood, emergency lighting along the floor's perimeter, throwing the same dim red she'd been navigating all night. Two men materialized from the dark 20 feet in. She walked forward. "Tell the brothers we're here," she said to the nearer man. Her voice was steady and carried the specific authority of someone who has earned it the hard way and knows the difference between that and performed authority. "Tell them we're alone. Tell them we have something they need to hear." The man looked at Roman. "Tell them," Roman said. The man moved. They waited. 30 seconds. Then footsteps from the upper level. The converted mezzanine that ran along the building's rear wall. The Harmon brothers came down together, which told her something. Brothers who operated in genuine coordination descended together because separation was a vulnerability they'd never developed. Marcus Harmon was older by 4 years, 62, the kind of physical scale that came from decades of dock work before he'd transitioned to managing it. Leland was behind him, thinner, the financial mind of the two in the same way Celeste had been the operational mind in her own partnership with Roman, though she noted the parallel without sentimentality. They stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Marcus looked at Roman. "You should have stayed in the county." "I grew up here," Roman said. "I don't stay anywhere else." Marcus looked at Celeste. "And her?" "Her name is Celeste Arden," Roman said. "Elias Arden's daughter." Something moved through both brothers' faces simultaneously. Leland said, "Elias is alive," she said. "Has been for 4 years. And has had a dead man's switch running on a server with your complete account structure for the past 2 years. 72-hour check-in cycle. Current window opened 6 hours ago." She paused. "Diane Voss in the federal building already has Bassett's documentation, which includes the transaction records you structured for the federal deal 18 years ago. She doesn't yet have the Arden server data." Another pause. "The next check-in is in approximately 4 hours." Leland's jaw moved. Marcus was very still. "What are you offering?" Marcus said. "Cooperation over obstruction," she said. "Same as Bassett." "Bassett will burn us," Leland said. "Whatever deal he made, Bassett's deal is his. Yours is yours." She held Marcus's eyes. "You built the Eastern Dock operations from scratch. 20 years of legitimate infrastructure alongside the other work. Voss cares about the other work. She cares about the federal deal and where the money moved and who structured it. She doesn't care about the docks." She paused. "Your lawyers can work with that. Your lawyers can build something from that, but only if you're the ones who walk into that conversation instead of the ones who get dragged into it." Marcus looked at Roman. "You're letting her speak for you," Marcus said. "She's speaking for herself," Roman said. "I'm agreeing with what she says." Marcus looked back at Celeste. The calculation behind his eyes was large and visible, and she let it run because interrupting a man's calculation with the right answer was less effective than letting him arrive at it himself. "We walk out of this building," Marcus said. "Yes. And we contact Voss. Through counsel, on your timeline, before the check-in window closes." Leland looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the floor, then at his brother, then at Celeste. 18 years, Marcus said. It wasn't an argument. It was the specific sound of a man measuring a thing he'd been carrying for a long time. "I know," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he moved toward the door. Leland followed. The two men who had materialized from the dark fell in behind their principals, and all 4 of them walked out of the warehouse into the night without another word spoken. She stood in the empty building and listened to their footsteps on the concrete outside, and then the sound of vehicles, and then nothing. Roman stood beside her. He was bleeding steadily, and she could hear the specific quality of his breathing that meant the ribs were worse than he'd been pretending, and she turned to look at him in the dim red light and said, "Sit down." Sit down, Roman." He sat. On the floor, back against the concrete wall, because there was nothing else to sit on, and she sat beside him, and the floor was cold through the silver dress, and she thought that was probably appropriate given the general conditions of the evening. Her father came in from the doorway where he'd been standing. He looked at Roman against the wall. He looked at Celeste. He came and sat on Roman's other side with the unhurried movement of a man who had made a decision about a situation and was done arguing with himself about it. The three of them sat against the warehouse wall. Outside, the city made its ambient noise, sirens somewhere distant, the low continuous sound of a place that never fully stopped. The building's emergency lights threw their dim red across the concrete floor and the high ceiling and the nothing that was left after a night that had contained everything. "Voss?" she said. "I'll make the call," her father said. "At dawn. That gives you both a few hours." He looked at her. "When did you last sleep?" "I don't remember." "Me neither." He paused. "I don't remember a lot of things. 4 years of small rooms, the quality of the light. After a while it all—" He stopped. "There are things I need to tell you. When there's time." "There's time," she said. "There's going to be time." Her father looked at his hands, nodded once. Roman said quietly, "Elias." Her father looked at him. "I should have moved faster," Roman said, "on getting you out. I told myself the board, the timing, the risk of destabilization. Those things were true. They weren't the whole truth." He paused. "The whole truth is that I understood you mattered to her, and I was not prepared for what that meant for the decisions I was willing to make." Her father was quiet for a moment. "You got her out tonight," he said. "She got herself out," Roman said. "She got all three of us out," her father said. He looked at Celeste. "Like I said, her mother's methods." Something warm moved through her chest that she let stay there instead of filing it away. The dawn came the way dawns came after long nights. Not dramatically, not with the abruptness of a curtain going up, but gradually, the quality of the dark changing degree by degree, until at some point you looked at the windows and realized you could see through them. Dex had found a first aid kit from somewhere. She'd worked on Roman's ribs in the absence of anything better. Not cracked, she assessed, badly bruised, the kind of thing that would take 6 weeks to stop reminding him of itself. The cut above his eyebrow was going to scar. She closed it with the kit's butterfly strips, and he sat still for the process with the patience of a man who had been through worse and understood there was no useful response to medical attention except endurance. Her father made the call to Voss at 5:47 a.m. She didn't listen. She stood near the warehouse's single functioning window and watched the sky change from dark to the particular gray that preceded color, and thought about the shape of what came next. Not the events of it, the structure of it, the life shape of what she was and what she'd been, and what the space between those two things looked like now that the work was done. Her father came to stand beside her. "She's moving," he said. "Bassett is already in contact with her office. The Harmon Brothers Council called before I did." He paused. "It's going to be a process. Months, a year. These things are always—" "I know," she said. "Your name is going to be in the record. I know that too. The things you did inside the organization—" "I know, Dad." She looked at him. "I built myself into someone who could do this. I knew what the cost of it looked like. I decided it was worth it." She paused. "Was it the same for you?" He looked at the gray sky. "I decided it was worth it for different reasons," he said. "You decided for yourself. That's better." He was quiet for a moment. "I'm going to need somewhere to go after the federal process starts, somewhere that isn't institutional." "I know a place," she said. He looked at her. "I've had an apartment for 3 years," she said. 14th floor. It smells like other people's cooking." She paused. "It has a second room." Her father looked at her for a long moment, the gray morning light on his face, the eyes she'd inherited looking at her with an expression that she identified as the specific weight of love that has survived something it wasn't sure it would survive. "Okay," he said. She found Roman at the warehouse's rear wall, where the morning light was coming through a high window. Standing, which she'd told him not to do, because of course he was standing. He had the document folder in his hands and was looking at it with the expression of a man who had been holding something all night and was deciding what to do with it. She stopped beside him. "The organization," she said. "What's left of it," he said. "After Moretti, after the Harmon brothers, after Bassett." He set the folder down on a nearby surface. "The legitimate infrastructure is sound. The financial architecture your father built is still functional after everything. The parts that need to come down—" He paused. "I've been taking them down for 2 years. The federal process will accelerate that." "And you?" He looked at her. "What happens to Roman Virelli?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was beginning its morning sounds. The specific acoustic shift of a place that had been running on reduced capacity overnight starting to expand back into its full register. "I don't know yet," he said, which was, she thought, the most honest thing he'd said all night. And he'd said several honest things. "I've been building towards something for 7 years. Last night either ended it or changed it into something I don't have a clear map for." He looked at his hands. "I've been running systems my whole life. I know how systems work. I don't have as much practice with—" He stopped. "With what?" she said. "With the parts that don't run on systems," he said. She looked at him in the morning light, the butterfly strips on his eyebrow, the bruised quality of the night still on him, in the specific, exhausted clarity of a man who had been stripped of his management layers one by one over the course of 8 hours and was standing in what was left. "You put me in a silver dress," she said. "Yes. For operational reasons." "Partially?" "And the other part." He looked at her with the expression she'd named in the car, the one that meant seen. She let him look. "I wanted the room to understand," he said, "that she was important, that there was someone who mattered to me in a way that I was done pretending didn't matter." He paused. "I had not worked out all the implications of that before last night. I've been working them out since." And, he said, "I've been wrong about a considerable number of things. The correct response to that is probably not to make additional large decisions before I've slept." She almost smiled. The almost smile surprised her. "That's the most sensible thing you've said all night," she said. "It's been a night with a low bar for sensible." She stood beside him in the morning light, and the silence between them was a different kind than the silences of the last 8 hours. Not operational, not tactical, not the silence of 2 people managing a situation. The silence of 2 people who had arrived somewhere they hadn't planned to be and were learning the shape of it. "My father is going to stay with me," she said, "for a while, until the federal process is underway and he has something stable." "That's good. I'm going to need time," she said, "from the organization, from—" She paused. "From all of it. Time to understand what I actually want now that the thing I was working toward is done." "Yes," Roman said. "I might decide I want something entirely different from what's here." "I know." "You're not going to argue that?" "No." He looked at her. "You spent 3 years working inside a structure that I built. You made yourself into someone who could navigate it, and then you navigated it with a precision that I am still processing. Whatever you decide you want, I am not in a position to argue against your judgment." He paused. "I don't think I was ever in that position. I was just slow to understand it." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ask me in 6 months," she said. "What?" "Whatever question you're not asking right now," she said. "Ask it in 6 months. When I've slept. When my father is in my spare room eating my groceries and complaining about my coffee. When you figured out what Roman Virelli looks like without the parts that need to come down." She paused. "Ask me then." He held her gaze. 6 months, he said. "Maybe 5, she said. "I haven't decided." Something moved through his face, not quite the almost smile she'd felt on her own face a moment ago, but its equivalent in a man who smiled rarely and had even less practice with the expression than she did. "I'll ask in 5, he said. Dex drove her father to the apartment on the 14th floor. As the city came fully into its morning, she sat in the back with her father and held his hand and didn't say anything because nothing needed to be said. And they were both, she understood now, people who could tolerate the weight of the real without needing to translate it into words immediately. At the building's entrance, her father stopped. He looked up at the 14th floor. Then he looked at her. "You kept an apartment," he said, "for 3 years, even while you were inside. You always had a place that was yours." "Yes," she said. "That was smart," he said. "I know," she said. "I learned from someone." His jaw moved, the morning light on his face, the gray of it, the specific tiredness of a man who had just spent his first night in 4 years with the sky above him instead of institutional walls, and the way that tiredness had something in it that was not only exhaustion. She took his arm and walked him inside. The apartment was exactly as she'd left it. The smell of the building, the crack in the hallway paint she'd always meant to report, the window in the main room that looked out over the city's mid-level rooftops toward the financial district. She stood at the window while her father looked at the second room, and she looked at the city laid out in the morning light and thought about all the things it contained that she now knew differently than she had yesterday. She heard her father sit down in the second room. She heard the specific sound of a man sitting on a real bed after 4 years of institutional furniture, the quiet of it, the weight of it. She stood at the window and let the morning do what mornings did, advance, regardless of what the night had been, without apology for the lightness it insisted on. And she breathed in and breathed out and let the night's full cost settle into her bones where it would live from now on. The specific density of things that had been spent and couldn't be recovered and had been worth it anyway. The city went on below her. Somewhere in the federal building, Diane Voss was reading documentation and beginning to understand the shape of what was coming. Somewhere in a processing facility, Moretti was speaking to lawyers. Somewhere across the city, Bassett and the Harmon brothers were making phone calls that would define the rest of what they had. Somewhere, Roman Virelli was figuring out what he looked like without the parts that needed to come down. She stood at the window in the dress she'd worn to a gala that had tried to become a burial and had become something else instead, and she looked at the city she'd been moving through like water through a system for 3 years, finding the channels and following the pressure, and she felt, underneath the exhaustion and the grief and the specific tenderness of wounds still fresh, something that she didn't need to name yet. She would name it later, in 5 months maybe, or possibly 4. She let the morning light cross her face and stood in the apartment that had always been hers and waited for her father to come out of the second room. And the city went on below her like it always had, indifferent and enormous, and full of the next thing, and she was ready.